Today, we're about to explore the stories of people who were mauled during safari trips, from a woman stepping into crocodile-infested waters for photo ops to a massive Nile crocodile hidden inches away from a tourist's feet at a riverside lodge. March 22, 2015 brought perfect weather to South Africa's Kruger National Park. For a 31-year-old freelance filmmaker, Anthony Smith from Manchester, this was the opportunity that would make or break his career. He'd convinced his production company to fund this research trip, believing that ground-level footage would set their elephant documentary apart from anything else on the market. Anthony was passionate about his craft, having spent 2 years working on nature documentaries across Europe. But this was his first major assignment in Africa, and he carried professional-grade equipment worth over 15,000 pounds. His goal was simple but dangerous: capture intimate elephant behavior that could only be observed on foot. Footage that would establish his reputation in the competitive world of wildlife cinematography. The walking safari group consisted of 8 tourists, 2 armed rangers, and a local tracker who knew the ancient elephant paths like the back of his hand. They'd been following fresh elephant tracks for over 2 hours, moving quietly through dense woodland where massive bulls often sought shade during the hottest part of the day. During the pre-dawn briefing, the lead ranger had been crystal clear about the protocols. Elephants pose the greatest danger to humans in the African wilderness. He'd specifically warned about the unpredictable nature of solitary bull elephants and stressed the absolute importance of maintaining silence and stillness when observing these giants. African elephants are the largest land mammals on Earth. Adult bulls can weigh up to 13,000 pounds and stand over 13 feet tall at the shoulder. They possess incredible intelligence and complex social structures, but solitary bulls can be extremely unpredictable and aggressive. Their hearing is so acute, they can detect vibrations through their feet from miles away, making them highly sensitive to any unusual sounds or movements. When an elephant decides you're a threat, you have seconds to live. The tracker spotted a massive bull elephant feeding approximately 50 meters ahead, partially hidden behind a cluster of trees. The lead ranger instructed everyone to remain absolutely silent and motionless while they observed the magnificent animal from what he considered a safe distance. Anthony had been recording continuously with his handheld camera, documenting the group's approach and the elephant's peaceful feeding behavior. But against the ranger's explicit instructions, he made a decision that would cost him his life. He began moving a few steps closer to get a better angle, driven by his ambition to capture footage that would make his career. That's when disaster struck with devastating speed. As he repositioned himself, his heavy camera equipment caught on a low branch. He stumbled, dropping his backup battery pack, which hit the ground with a loud thud that echoed through the quiet woodland like a gunshot. The massive elephant was startled by the sudden, unexpected noise echoing through the peaceful woodland. His enormous ears spread wide as he searched for the source of the disturbance. His ability to detect ground vibrations and capture low-frequency sound made him acutely aware of the threat. What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed that left everyone helpless to intervene. The elephant began his first charge, a thunderous bluff charge designed to intimidate and assess the threat level. His massive feet pounded the ground as he covered half the distance before stopping abruptly, trunk raised, testing the air. The rangers immediately began shouting commands, trying to move the group to safety while preparing their weapons. But when the group failed to retreat and the perceived threat remained, the bull elephant committed to a full charge, determined to eliminate what he now saw as a serious danger to his territory. Other tourists managed to capture limited footage of the chaotic moments as the attack began, the massive form thundering toward them, people screaming and scattering in pure terror. The camera was able to capture the initial attack of the elephant before the footage becomes completely disoriented as panic takes over, and you can hear the deafening sound of 6 tons of enraged elephants bearing down on the group. The bull elephant's massive body slammed into Anthony with devastating force. The impact knocked him unconscious instantly. The elephant's massive front foot came down on his chest and abdomen, causing catastrophic internal trauma before the animal moved away. Satisfied that the threat had been eliminated, the rangers fired warning shots to drive the elephant back, but it was already too late. Anthony never regained consciousness, dying from massive internal injuries within moments of the attack. The investigation revealed that Anthony had violated fundamental walking safari protocols by leaving his designated position and making noise that attracted the elephant's attention. The limited footage captured by other group members was reviewed as evidence and led to the safari company implementing stricter guidelines, requiring tourists to sign additional waivers, acknowledging the extreme risks of ground-level wildlife encounters. Anthony's production company used the incident to develop enhanced safety training for crews working with dangerous wildlife, but his death served as a brutal reminder that in the African wilderness, one mistake can be your last. The other members of the walking safari group were so traumatized by witnessing the attack that several required psychological counseling upon returning home. September 3, 2018, and the Okavango Delta spread across northwestern Botswana in a vast network of channels, lagoons, and reed beds that supported one of Africa's densest concentrations of Nile crocodiles. The dry season had reduced water levels, concentrating wildlife around permanent channels and creating deceptively calm shallows where predators waited beneath the surface. Afternoon temperatures hovered near 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and the water appeared inviting to visitors unfamiliar with the risks concealed in its depths. Emily Sanchez had built a wildlife blog for over 3 years, documenting safari experiences with an emphasis on dramatic, low-angle photography. At 26, she had developed a distinctive visual style that required wading into shallow water or positioning herself at ground level. Her background included a degree in digital media and several wildlife photography workshops, but no formal training in animal behavior or field safety. The Okavango trip had been planned as content for a sponsored series. Emily had researched photographic techniques and equipment, but had not consulted regional safety guidelines or crocodile behavior studies. She told her assistant she wanted shots no one else was getting, and had previously posted images of herself standing in shallow water in Zambia and Zimbabwe without incident, creating a false sense of security where absence of negative outcomes was interpreted as absence of risk. The Okavango Delta supports several thousand Nile crocodiles. Adults commonly reach 13 to 16 feet and weigh over 1,500 pounds. They are ambush predators that remain motionless in shallow water for extended periods, with only their eyes and nostrils exposed. Their attack strategy relies on explosive acceleration from a stationary position, typically launched from within 10 feet of the target. As the Mokoro, a traditional dugout canoe, glided along a narrow channel, Emily spotted crocodiles basking on a sandbar approximately 30 meters away. She asked the guide, a local polar named Kagosi, to bring the canoe closer to the opposite bank for a water-level shot. Kagosi explained that entering the water was strictly prohibited. Signs posted at the camp departure point clearly stated, "No swimming, crocodiles present," in multiple languages. Emily argued she would only go ankle deep and stay within arm's reach of the Mokoro. Kagosi refused, stating that crocodiles often remain hidden in shallow water and that attacks occur with no warning. Emily persisted, suggesting she had waded in similar conditions before without problems. Before he could respond further, she shifted her weight and stepped over the side of the canoe. The bottom was soft mud. Her boots sank several inches, and the water rose to mid-calf. She took another step toward the bank, and the depth increased to just below her knees. The water was brown with suspended sediment, reducing underwater visibility to near zero. She could not see her own feet. Emily raised her camera and crouched slightly to lower her angle, framing a shot of the distant sandbar. Kagosi remained in the Mokoro and repeated his warning. Emily took a third step, angling toward a gap in the reeds where the light was better, now approximately 6 feet from the canoe. She began shooting in burst mode. Approximately 12 feet to her left, partially concealed by a small reed clump, a large Nile crocodile lay motionless in water less than 2 feet deep. Only the top of its head and the ridge of its back were visible above the surface, easily mistaken for submerged logs. The animal had been in position for over an hour, a common behavior during midday heat when crocodiles thermoregulate by remaining partially submerged. As Emily moved, vibrations from her footsteps transmitted through the water, providing the crocodile with directional information. Her repeated steps, combined with her stationary position while photographing, created a clear target profile. The attack began with no surface disturbance. The crocodile accelerated from its resting position in a straight-line burst, propelled by powerful tail strokes, covering the distance in less than 2 seconds. Emily did not see the approach. The first indication was a violent impact against her right leg. The crocodile's jaws closed around her ankle and lower calf, teeth penetrating through her boot and into the tissue beneath. She screamed and fell backward. The camera flew from her hands and splashed into the water. The crocodile immediately initiated a death roll, spinning along its longitudinal axis to destabilize prey, tear tissue, and drag the victim underwater. The roll twisted Emily's leg violently, fracturing the tibia and fibula and tearing ligaments in the knee and ankle. The rotational force pulled her completely off her feet. Her head went underwater as the crocodile continued spinning. She surfaced briefly, gasping, before being pulled under again. Gosi drove the Mokoro forward, striking the water with his pole in an attempt to drive the crocodile away. The animal surfaced briefly, still gripping Emily's leg, then submerged and moved toward deeper water. Emily's head remained under underwater. Bubbles rose to the surface, then stopped. The entire sequence from initial strike to full submersion lasted approximately 15 seconds. Gosi radioed the base camp immediately. 2 additional Makoros arrived within 8 minutes, carrying rangers equipped with rifles. They scanned the channel but saw no sign of Emily or the crocodile. Standard protocol prohibits entering the water during active incidents due to the high risk of additional attacks. Rangers established a perimeter and waited for specialized recovery teams. Emily's body was located approximately 90 minutes later, submerged roughly 40 meters from the attack site. Recovery was conducted using poles and ropes. The body showed extensive trauma to the right leg, with crushing injuries and tissue loss consistent with a large crocodile bite and death roll. The medical examiner listed drowning as the primary cause of death, with severe leg trauma as a contributing factor, noting that loss of consciousness from forced submersion would have occurred within 2 to 3 minutes. The crocodile was not located or removed. In open water systems with large crocodile populations, individual identification is often impossible, and removal of single animals has minimal impact on overall population behavior. The incident was classified as a preventable human error, resulting from ignoring posted warnings and entering water in known crocodile habitat. The safari operator implemented additional safety measures, including mandatory briefings with signed acknowledgement forms, physical barriers on Mokoros to prevent passengers from easily exiting, and immediate trip termination for anyone attempting to enter the water. It was August 28, 2017, and the dry season had baked Tanzania's Rufiji River basin into a landscape of golden grass and exposed riverbanks. Small independent operators worked in remote areas along the basin's periphery where oversight was limited, offering cut-rate camping safaris that often lacked basic safety infrastructure. Jorrit Makelaar was a 27-year-old Dutch backpacker midway through a 6-month overland journey from Cairo to Cape Town. A recent environmental science graduate, he had traveled through 12 countries and developed the seasoned traveler's confidence that sometimes blurred into complacency. He had booked a 4-day camping safari through an operator found on a backpacker forum, attracted by the low price and promises of authentic wilderness immersion. The operator was a 2-person outfit with a single aging 4x4 and untrained seasonal staff. Campsites were improvised clearings in unfenced bushland, selected for game viewing rather than safety. The current site sat near a seasonal tributary of the Rufiji, in a corridor known locally as a regular transit route for predators moving between the river and surrounding woodlands. 4 small dome tents were arranged around a fire pit, with a rudimentary canvas latrine positioned beyond the tent line near the tree line. Safety measures were inconsistent: limited lighting, no overnight guard, no alarm system. A single camp attendant, 22-year-old Baraka Nyamwezi, slept in a separate tent with only a flashlight and whistle. Makelaar's group included 2 other backpackers. The evening was uneventful: dinner around the fire, then bed. Nyamwezi had not mentioned lion activity, though local wildlife authorities had reportedly issued an advisory weeks earlier warning of increased predator movement along the river corridor. Whether the operator received or relayed this information remained unclear. At approximately 11 o'clock, Makelaar left his tent to use the latrine. The fire had reduced to embers, the moon obscured by cloud cover. Nyamwezi was asleep. No one accompanied him. African lions are estimated to be responsible for over 200 human fatalities annually across the continent, though the true figure is difficult to verify, with the majority occurring in rural communities rather than tourist settings. While lions generally avoid humans, individuals in compromised condition, such as young males recently expelled from a pride, old or injured animals, or lions in areas of depleted prey, may exhibit opportunistic predatory behavior toward humans. Lions are primarily nocturnal hunters with night vision estimated to be several times more sensitive than that of humans. Their hunting strategy against smaller or solitary prey involves a short, explosive ambush from concealment, typically targeting the neck or head to deliver a killing bite that suffocates or severs the spinal cord. According to the scene reconstruction conducted by Tanzanian Wildlife Authority investigators, a young male lion had been moving through the river corridor that night. The animal was later estimated to be approximately 4 years old, based on dental examination, recently independent and in below-average physical condition, with visible rib definition suggesting inadequate nutrition over the preceding weeks. Track evidence indicated the lion had entered the camp perimeter from the tree line near the latrine, likely following scent trails from cooking activity earlier in the evening. Nyamwezi was awakened by a sound he initially could not identify. By his account to investigators, he heard a brief, sharp vocalization from the direction of the latrine, followed by what he described as a heavy dragging sound. He blew his whistle repeatedly and directed his flashlight toward the tree line. Other guests emerged from their tents within moments, adding their flashlights to the search. Based on evidence at the scene, investigators determined the lion had likely attacked MAULED from the side as he moved between the latrine and the tent line. Track impressions in the soft soil showed the lion had been positioned in tall grass near the path. The attack appeared to have been a single explosive strike, consistent with predatory ambush behavior. Drag marks led from the path toward the tree line, some distance into the bush. The group found MAULED's body at the edge of the tree line. Investigators noted injuries consistent with a lion attack, including a severe bite wound to the neck and deep claw lacerations across the upper body. The bite had likely caused fatal neck injuries, resulting in rapid blood loss. Evidence suggested death had occurred within minutes of the initial strike. The lion had apparently abandoned its prey when the flashlights and whistle noise approached, retreating deeper into the bush. Nyamwezi used the operator's vehicle to drive to the nearest village with cellular reception, some distance away. Authorities reached the camp later that morning. Tanzanian Wildlife Authority investigators processed the scene, recovering track evidence and conducting interviews with the surviving campers and staff. The investigation reportedly determined that the operator had failed to implement adequate safety measures for camping in predator habitat, including sufficient overnight security, proper lighting, escort protocols for nighttime movement, and communication of wildlife advisories. According to local authorities, the operator faced possible sanctions, and the permit was suspended pending review. The lion believed responsible was tracked and destroyed by wildlife authorities several days later, based on track evidence linking the animal to the attack site. MAULED's family was notified through the Dutch embassy. It was October 8, 2016, and the morning air in South Luangwa National Park carried the crisp coolness that came just before the Zambian heat settled in for the day. The Mopane woodland stretched endlessly in every direction, prime leopard territory where experienced guides knew constant vigilance was required. Daniel Kowalski checked his rifle one final time, running through the safety protocols he'd performed hundreds of times before. At 31 years old, the professional safari guide had spent 7 years leading walking safaris through some of Africa's most dangerous terrain. That morning, Daniel was leading a group of 4 tourists, 2 couples, one from Germany and one from the United States. Werner Schmidt was filming continuously with a handheld camcorder. The group had been walking for over an hour when Daniel spotted fresh leopard tracks pressed into soft sand near a dry riverbed. Leopards were notoriously elusive, and sightings were rare enough to be considered the highlight of any trip. Daniel decided to follow the tracks, hoping to give his clients a glimpse from a safe distance. Werner's footage shows the group moving in single file. After some time, Daniel raised his hand in a stop signal. The camera zooms in, showing a male leopard well ahead, feeding on an impala carcass in tall grass. For a couple of minutes, the leopard fed, apparently unaware. Then it stopped, its head lifted, ears rotating forward, the leopard's eyes locked onto the group. Daniel instructed the group to back away slowly. The leopard stood, abandoned the carcass, and began walking toward them. Deliberate, purposeful steps. Its body language was tense, ears flat, tail twitching. Leopards are Africa's most adaptable big cats, weighing up to 200 pounds with bite forces strong enough to crush bone. Unlike lions, which sometimes use mock charges as warnings, leopards are more likely to either retreat completely or commit fully to an attack, especially when defending a fresh kill. When a leopard perceives a threat to its food source, its response can escalate to lethal violence in seconds. Within moments, the leopard charged. It broke into a full sprint, covering ground with explosive speed. Daniel fired toward the ground near the leopard, hoping to turn it. The leopard didn't stop. At a fresh kill, the gunshot only reinforced the leopard's perception of threat. At close range, Daniel fired again, aiming to wound. The shot went wide. The leopard launched itself at Daniel in a single leap. Werner's footage becomes chaotic. When the camera steadies, it shows Daniel on the ground with the leopard on top of him. The animal's jaws clamped onto Daniel's left shoulder, its rear claws raking his torso. Robert Chen, one of the tourists, ran forward with a hiking pole and struck the leopard. The animal released Daniel's shoulder momentarily and swiped at Robert. The leopard turned back to Daniel, its jaws clamping down on his throat. The bite was crushing, targeting the windpipe and major blood vessels. Daniel's body went limp beneath it. Werner's camera captures the leopard maintaining its grip for several more seconds, before finally releasing him and sprinting back toward its kill. The entire attack lasted less than half a minute. The remaining tourists stood frozen, their training to remain still during wildlife encounters, overridden by what they'd just witnessed. Daniel lay motionless, his throat crushed, blood spreading across the ground. The leopard's bite had destroyed his airway and severed critical vessels. He lost consciousness within moments and died shortly after. Robert Chen, despite his attempt to help, was left with deep lacerations on his forearm from the leopard's defensive swipe, injuries that would require extensive treatment once they reached medical facilities. The tourists used Daniel's emergency beacon to radio for help. A rescue vehicle arrived within half an hour. Paramedics confirmed Daniel was dead at the scene. Authorities investigated using Werner's footage. Their analysis determined Daniel had followed all appropriate protocols, but had unknowingly approached too close to a leopard defending a fresh kill. The park classified it as defensive behavior. No action was taken against the leopard. Werner's footage was shared with safari guide training programs as a tragic example of how quickly leopard encounters can escalate. However, the most graphic portions showing the actual fatal bite and Daniel's final moments were edited out before any training use. Park officials and Daniel's employer agreed that while the footage had educational value, the full unedited version was too disturbing and would serve no additional purpose beyond what edited segments could provide. It was July 21st, 2015. The South African sun still low over Kruger National Park, casting long shadows across the savannah as the morning game drive came to a sudden halt. The guide cut the engine near a cluster of marula trees, where a leopard lay draped across a low branch, its spotted coat dappled by filtered light. Colin Mercer was a 40-year-old IT systems analyst from Bath, England, known among colleagues for his contrarian streak and tendency to challenge workplace protocols he deemed unnecessary. His friends described him as confident to the point of abrasive, the type who dismissed safety briefings as theater designed for less experienced travelers. Colin had arrived at Kruger 3 days earlier on a solo trip, having saved for 2 years to afford what he called his African adventure. This safari was Colin's 5th game drive that week, and he had grown increasingly dismissive of his guide's instructions. He had openly mocked the warnings about maintaining distance from predators, joking that the guides were overly cautious to avoid lawsuits. That morning, he had brought his expensive digital camera specifically to capture what friends said he described as real wildlife photography, not the distant shots other tourists settled for. The dirt road cut through dry grassland dotted with acacia and scattered bush, perfect camouflage for the ambush predators that ruled this territory. Leopards are among Africa's most dangerous big cats despite their smaller size compared to lions, weighing up to 200 pounds and possessing the strongest bite force relative to body size of any feline. They are primarily solitary and intensely territorial, capable of dragging prey twice their weight into trees to protect kills from scavengers. Unlike lions that hunt cooperatively in open spaces, leopards rely on stealth and explosive power, attacking from concealment with precision strikes to the neck or spine. The guide, Kiwe, had spotted the leopard about 65 feet from the road and positioned the vehicle safely, warning everyone to remain seated and silent. Colin immediately began unbuckling his seatbelt, dismissing the rules as paranoid. During a brief distraction, he stepped out, walking 15 feet toward the leopard as Kiwe shouted and tried to stop him. Colin jogged another 20 feet, laughing and raising his camera, ignoring the leopard's warning signals. Colin had now closed the distance to roughly 20 to 25 feet from the tree when he crouched slightly to adjust his angle. The leopard launched from the branch, covering the gap in 3 bounding leaps that took less than 2 seconds. Witnesses in the vehicle later reported seeing a blur of spotted fur before Colin disappeared into the tall grass beside the road. He fell forward under the impact, the leopard's full weight, approximately 180 pounds, slamming into his upper back and driving him face first into the dirt. The cat's jaws clamped onto the back of Colin's neck with surgical precision, its teeth driving deep into muscle and connective tissue near the cervical spine. Colin's scream cut off abruptly as pressure on his spinal cord sent waves of numbness radiating through his shoulders and arms. The leopard's rear claws raked his back repeatedly, shredding his shirt and opening long gashes across his shoulder blades. Kiwe reached them within 10 seconds, swinging the metal pole and blaring the vehicle horn again while shouting in an effort to distract the animal and drive it off without closing the distance further. The leopard maintained its grip, its jaws clamped with crushing force on the back of Colin's neck. The sounds, Colin's gurgling attempts to breathe, the wet tearing of flesh, the leopard's low growl, carried clearly to the horrified tourists in the vehicle. One passenger began radioing for emergency assistance. After approximately 25 seconds of sustained attack, a second Ranger vehicle arrived, its driver honking the horn repeatedly and accelerating toward the scene. The leopard finally released Colin and retreated into the brush, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. Colin lay motionless except for shallow, irregular breathing. His neck was a mass of puncture wounds and torn tissue, blood pooling around his head. The Rangers wrapped Colin's neck as best they could and loaded him into the vehicle. Paramedics were contacted immediately, and once a nearby clearing along the road was confirmed safe for landing, a medical helicopter airlifted him to a trauma center in Nelsprout within the hour. Surgeons worked for 6 hours to stabilize the vertebral fracture and repair damaged blood vessels. Despite the initial efforts, his condition deteriorated overnight due to extensive spinal cord damage and internal bleeding that could not be fully controlled. Colin Mercer died early the following morning. A short notice appeared weeks later in a regional park safety bulletin stating that a tourist had died after exiting his vehicle against explicit instructions during a predator sighting. Kiwe, who had guided safaris for 17 years without incident, resigned 3 months later and focused on a personal business. It was March 14, 2015, and the afternoon sun cast harsh light across the private game reserve bordering Kruger National Park, where open grassland stretched toward acacia clusters and rocky outcrops that had served as lion territory for generations. The dry season had concentrated prey animals around permanent water sources, drawing predators into predictable patterns along well-worn game trails. Tour vehicles moved through designated routes, maintaining distance protocols that had prevented serious incidents for over a decade. Rita Thompson had built a social media reputation, documenting luxury travel experiences across 6 continents, with carefully staged photographs that emphasized proximity to exotic locations and wildlife. At 38, she had developed a systematic approach to content creation, prioritizing visual impact over safety protocols, and had previously posted images from locations where she had bypassed barriers or ignored posted warnings. Rita chose this particular reserve because it offered open-top vehicles and close lion sightings. The reserve's marketing emphasized safe wildlife viewing, but she had researched which guides allowed the closest approaches. Friends who had traveled with her before described her pattern of pushing boundaries, asking guides to get just a little closer, and dismissing safety briefings as overly cautious. She told others she had been on 5 previous safaris without incident, a statement that reflected exposure without understanding the statistical nature of wildlife attacks, where repeated risk-taking eventually intersects with predator behavior. The reserve supported a stable pride of lions, with open grassland, scattered cover, and abundant impala providing reliable hunting territory. Adult lionesses typically weigh between 260 and 400 pounds and can accelerate to 50 miles per hour in short bursts. Their hunting strategy relies on coordinated ambush, with individuals positioned to cut off escape routes while others drive prey toward the attack point. In open terrain, lions often rest in visible locations during midday heat, appearing relaxed while remaining alert to movement within their territory. As the open-top Jeep approached the Pride, Rita immediately reached for her phone, standing slightly to get a better angle over the seat in front of her. The guide, a 19-year veteran named Dalton, reminded all passengers to remain seated with seatbelts fastened. The Pride consisted of 7 individuals, 3 adult females, 2 subadults, and 2 cubs. They rested in scattered positions roughly 30 yards from the vehicle track, close enough for clear photography but outside the distance that typically triggers defensive behavior. Rita leaned farther out, bracing one hand on the roll bar while extending her phone toward the lions. Dalton repeated the instruction to sit down, his tone shifting from routine reminder to direct command. The other passengers, 2 couples from Germany and a family from Johannesburg, remained seated, cameras raised but bodies inside the vehicle frame. The lions showed typical resting behavior, ears rotating towards sounds, occasional tail flicks, but no sustained attention toward the vehicle. Safari guides in this region rely on the principle that vehicles are perceived as single large objects rather than collections of individual prey animals, a perception that breaks down when human forms separate from the vehicle outline. Rita unbuckled her seatbelt with a quiet click. She shifted her weight, placing one foot on the seat and preparing to step onto the vehicle's running board. Dalton's hand moved toward the ignition, preparing to drive forward and away from the Pride. Before he could turn the key, Rita swung her leg over the side of the Jeep, her boot making contact with the metal running board with a hollow thud that carried across the quiet grassland. The nearest lioness, a subadult female estimated at approximately 280 pounds, lifted her head immediately. Her ears rotated forward, locking onto the movement. Lionesses in this age range are developing hunting skills and are more reactive to potential threats than fully mature adults. meters. The animal rose to a standing position in a single fluid motion, her body oriented directly toward Rita. Rita remained focused on her phone screen, adjusting the angle for her shot. She leaned farther out, now standing fully on the running board with only one hand gripping the roll bar. Her body extended beyond the vehicle's protective outline, creating a separate visual target. The lioness took 3 steps forward, closing the distance from 30 yards to approximately 25. Her tail hung low, and her shoulders dropped slightly, a posture documented in field studies as preceding investigative or defensive approaches. The other Pride members remained resting, but 2 adults turned their heads toward the vehicle. Dalton shouted a direct command to get back inside. The urgency in his voice caused the other passengers to pull back from the vehicle's edges. Rita glanced toward him, smiled, and raised one finger indicating just one more second before turning back to frame her shot. The lioness accelerated from a walk to a loping run. She covered the remaining distance in seconds, her body low to the ground in a direct charge rather than the curved approach used in coordinated hunts. At approximately 10 yards, she launched forward in a final burst, targeting Rita's exposed lower body. The impact came as the lioness's front paws struck Rita's left thigh and hip, claws extended for grip. The force knocked her sideways off the running board. Her phone flew from her hand, spinning through the air before landing in the dirt several feet away. She fell backward, her shoulders striking the vehicle's side panel before her body tumbled to the ground. The lioness landed on top of her, jaws closing around her upper thigh in a crushing bite. Lioness bite force, while lower than that of male lions, still exceeds 650 pounds per square inch, sufficient to fracture the femur and sever major blood vessels. The femoral artery, when compromised, can result in blood loss exceeding 1 liter per minute. Dalton grabbed the rifle mounted beside the driver's seat and fired a warning shot into the air. The sharp crack echoed across the grassland. The lioness released her grip immediately and bounded away, rejoining the Pride at a distance of approximately 50 yards. The entire attack sequence, from initial charge to retreat, lasted less than 15 seconds. Rita lay on her back beside the vehicle, her left leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Blood spread rapidly across her khaki pants, darkening the fabric from hip to knee. She remained conscious initially, her breathing rapid and shallow. Dalton and the trailing guide immediately applied pressure to the wound using emergency medical supplies. The nearest medical facility with surgical capability was located 47 kilometers away. Dalton radioed for an emergency airlift, but the reserve's location meant an estimated response time of 25 to 30 minutes. They loaded Rita into the vehicle and began driving toward the reserve entrance, maintaining pressure on the wound. Approximately 12 minutes into the drive, Rita's breathing became irregular. Her skin appeared pale and cool, indicators of hypovolemic shock from massive blood loss. Despite continued pressure on the wound, bleeding had not been fully controlled. Major vessel damage in the upper leg is difficult to manage in field conditions without surgical intervention. Rita lost consciousness 18 minutes after the attack. Dalton continued CPR while the second guide drove, but she showed no response. They reached the reserve gate 23 minutes after the incident, where an ambulance was waiting. Paramedics continued resuscitation efforts during transport, but Rita was pronounced dead approximately 40 minutes after the initial attack. The medical examiner's report documented massive trauma to the left femur, with complete fracture and severing of the femoral artery, concluding that death resulted from exsanguination. The lioness was monitored but not removed. Wildlife authorities determined that the animal had responded to a perceived threat created by human behavior rather than exhibiting predatory stalking. The reserve implemented stricter enforcement protocols following the incident, including written acknowledgement of safety rules before boarding, immediate trip termination for passengers who unbuckle near wildlife, and additional guide training on managing non-compliant tourists. Regional safari associations circulated the incident details as a case study in the consequences of ignoring established safety protocols. June 8, 2016 brought another spectacular evening to the luxury Chobe Safari Lodge in Botswana. For a 29-year-old software engineer, Ben Harold from Seattle, this elevated riverside deck represented everything he dreamed about during 2 years of saving for his solo African adventure. Ben was a successful tech worker who had built his passion for videography during weekend trips to the Pacific Northwest. He'd brought thousands of dollars worth of filming equipment to document his African adventure, and the lodge's marketing materials had specifically highlighted the safety and comfort of their hippo viewing experience, a deciding factor in his booking. The evening hippo viewing had become legendary among safari enthusiasts. The elevated wooden deck extended directly over the Chobe River, providing guests with an unobstructed view of the massive animals as they emerged from the water for their nightly feeding. The deck was positioned 15 feet above the river and had been used safely for years. though recent heavy rains had caused some minor structural stress to certain sections. Hippopotamuses are among Africa's most dangerous animals, responsible for more human deaths than any other large mammal on the continent. Adult bulls can weigh up to 4,000 pounds and reach speeds of 30 miles per hour on land. Their massive jaws can open to 150 degrees and deliver a bite force exceeding 1,800 pounds per square inch. Their canine teeth can grow up to 20 inches long and are razor sharp, capable of crushing bones like twigs. Ben had been filming the hippos for over an hour as they grazed along the riverbank directly below the deck. He operated his handheld video camera continuously, documenting the incredible wildlife spectacle unfolding beneath him. He felt completely secure on the elevated platform, believing that the height provided absolute protection from the massive animals below. As the evening progressed, he became increasingly ambitious with his filming, leaning far over the deck's railing to capture dramatic downward angles of the feeding hippos. The lodge staff had warned guests to remain seated and avoid sudden movements, but his enthusiasm for the perfect footage gradually overcame his caution. That's when everything went catastrophically wrong. Ben leaned even further over the railing, trying to get closer footage of the hippos below, when he overbalanced and the wooden railing gave way under the stress. The combination of his weight and awkward positioning caused the already weakened section to fail completely. He plummeted 15 feet into the river water, about 5 feet deep, directly beside a massive bull hippo, still gripping his waterproof camera as he hit the water with a tremendous splash. The disturbance in the water immediately caught the attention of the 3,500-pound bull hippo, but instead of attacking immediately, the massive animal did what hippos typically do when startled. He submerged, disappearing beneath the murky water while Ben struggled to orient himself in the river. For a terrifying moment, everything was silent, except for the man's panicked splashing as he tried to reach the riverbank. Lodge staff above began shouting emergency procedures, but they were powerless to help from their position 15 feet above. Then the hippo resurfaced with deadly intent. The massive animal had repositioned himself underwater and emerged directly beside the struggling man. The bull hippo's territorial instincts kicked in as he identified this thrashing intruder as a threat that needed to be eliminated immediately. His massive jaws opened wide, revealing those deadly canine teeth. The victim's camera captured the first few seconds of the attack, the hippo's massive jaws opening wide and lunging toward him, before the camera was released from his grip during the violent encounter, sinking beneath the surface and continuing to record nothing but dark, muddy water. The attack was swift and absolutely devastating. The hippo's jaws clamped down on Ben's torso with bone-crushing force, his massive canine teeth puncturing through the man's chest and abdomen. The bite force instantly fractured ribs and punctured vital organs as the hippo's powerful neck muscles crushed him violently like a heavy machinery. The attack lasted less than 30 seconds, but the hippo's incredible bite force and the man's injuries from the fall ensured that the encounter would be fatal. Ben died from massive internal trauma and blood loss before emergency medical personnel could reach the remote lodge location. The investigation revealed that recent heavy rains had caused some structural stress to that section of the deck, though regular inspections had not identified it as an immediate safety concern. The official cause of death was listed as massive internal trauma and organ damage caused by hippo attack, compounded by injuries from the 15-foot fall. Ben's death led to immediate safety upgrades at the lodge, including reinforced railings and stricter guest safety protocols. The incident prompted enhanced structural inspection requirements at wildlife viewing facilities throughout Botswana, ensuring that the tragedy would lead to improved safety measures for future visitors. It was March 8, 2016, and the sun hung low over the Okavango Delta. Hannah Mulenga adjusted her waterproof camera housing, pressing her thumb along the rubber seal one last time before wading deeper into the murky shallows. The water was tea-dark from tannins, opaque enough that her calves disappeared within inches. Hannah was 27 years old, a photography enthusiast from Lusaka, Zambia, known among local wildlife circles for her fearless approach to documenting animal behavior. She worked part-time for a conservation NGO, producing stills used in school programs and visitor briefings. She favored eye-level shots that placed the viewer inside the animal's space, rather than observing from a distance. Colleagues often joked that Hannah would wade through anything for the perfect frame, a comment delivered half in admiration and half in concern. Over 3 years, she had photographed hippos along rivers and floodplains across southern Africa. That confidence had grown gradually, and to her mind, responsibly. She had never been injured, never charged, never forced to abandon a shoot because of fear. Each successful session reinforced the last. What she had not fully accounted for were the risks posed by other predators that shared those same waterways. Nile crocodiles are among the most formidable predators on the continent. Adults can reach lengths of up to 18 feet and weigh more than 1,600 pounds, with a bite force measured in the thousands of pounds per square inch. Capable of crushing bone and tearing muscle with minimal effort. Built for ambush, they can remain motionless for hours. When they strike, they do so with explosive speed, lunging forward in bursts that can reach approximately 22 miles per hour in water. Movement and vibration trigger their prey response. To a crocodile, a wading antelope, a splashing bird, or a human knee-deep in a channel registers the same. That afternoon, Hannah's guide, a local man named Tumalo, had warned her repeatedly about entering the water. He had pointed out specific channels where crocodiles had been seen earlier that morning, noting the slide marks on muddy banks and the faint ripples that suggested submerged bodies. Hannah listened, nodded, and acknowledged his experience. But he said that she maintained that the angle from shore flattened the animals and removed the sense of scale she needed. She told him she had waded before, many times, and knew how to read water for danger signs. Tumelo did not argue further, but he remained uneasy as he watched her step off the bank. From roughly 30 yards away, Tumelo observed Hannah progress deeper into the channel. The water rose from her ankles to her knees, rippling around her legs as she moved slowly to avoid startling the hippos. They were clustered on the far bank, an estimated 50 to 70 feet away, their broad backs breaking the surface in a loose line. The hippos were close enough to dominate the scene visually, but not close enough to deter a crocodile concealed along the reed line where Hannah waded. Another group of hippos lingered farther ahead, half submerged and apparently indifferent to her presence. Hannah stopped, adjusted her stance, and then knelt to stabilize her shot, lowering her center of gravity and bracing her elbows against her thighs. The attack came without warning. There was no visible disturbance beforehand, no ripple or shadow to signal what was beneath her. The surface erupted as the crocodile launched upward, its massive jaws clamping onto Hannah's right thigh with crushing force. The impact knocked her sideways, twisting her torso as she fell. Her camera remained clutched in both hands as her brain struggled to register what had happened. Tumelo heard her scream, a sharp, brief sound that cut across the channel. He ran to the bank, shouting into his radio to alert the camp emergency net, and grabbed a long pole and a throw rope. He edged into the shallows but stopped short when the water exploded again in front of him. Recognizing the danger, he backed away and called for the boat rather than entering the water himself. The crocodile, later estimated at approximately 14 feet in length, immediately employed its signature death roll. Underwater, it spun with violent speed, using rotational force to tear through muscle and compromise bone. Hannah's femur fractured in multiple places, the jagged breaks consistent with torsional stress. Her pelvis dislocated as the animal twisted, its teeth sunk nearly 4 inches into her flesh. Mud and blood clouded the water. She surfaced once, gasping and thrashing, her movements frantic and uncoordinated. It was the only time she broke the surface after the initial strike. Rangers from a nearby anti-poaching patrol, already navigating an adjacent channel less than 3 kilometers away, arrived roughly 12 minutes after Tumelo's call. They brought poles and firearms, spreading out along the bank and scanning the water. By the time they reached the site, there was nothing visible except Hannah's backpack, which had snagged on a cluster of submerged papyrus roots approximately 20 feet from where the attack had occurred. The channel had returned to a deceptive calm, the surface smooth and dark, offering no immediate indication of the violence it had concealed moments earlier. The hippos had shifted position, but remained in the area, their presence lending an unsettling normalcy to the scene. Recovery efforts began immediately, but were complicated by the maze-like network of channels and reed beds that defined the delta. Rangers searched until nightfall and resumed at first light. Hannah's body was located the following morning, partially submerged in reeds roughly 200 yards downstream from the attack site. The coroner's report documented massive trauma to the right leg and pelvis, with fractures and tissue damage consistent with extreme rotational force. The official cause of death was listed as drowning following catastrophic blood loss and shock from the initial attack. In the days that followed, wildlife officials noted an increase in crocodile encounters linked to drought conditions that were pushing animals and people into the same shrinking water sources. Access routes narrowed, and predators accustomed to ambushing wildlife found humans entering areas that had once been avoided. Hannah's camera equipment was recovered and returned to her family in Lusaka. The memory cards were intact, containing images from earlier in the day, quiet frames of water and hippos taken before she entered the channel. It was September 14, 2013, and the dry season had reduced Zimbabwe's Zambezi River system to its annual low. A small safari lodge overlooked a tributary, its viewing deck extending to within yards of the waterline, where receding water had exposed a shallow, sun-warmed inlet. Guests had been using the inlet for casual wading throughout the season, cooling their feet in the ankle-deep water during the afternoon heat. The lodge had never posted warning signage at the water's edge, and staff had been observed wading in the same area. No barrier or fence separated the lodge grounds from the river. Celia Marsden was a 58-year-old retired librarian from Shropshire, England, who had saved for several years to fund what she described in her booking correspondence as a once-in-a-lifetime African safari. Marsden had arrived at the lodge 4 days earlier as part of a small group tour, and had quickly settled into the rhythm of morning game drives and afternoon leisure on the deck. She had watched other guests wade in the inlet on her second day, and had done so herself on the third afternoon without incident. The lodge manager, 40-year-old Farai Matanga, had reportedly been aware of crocodile activity in the tributary for months. Local fishermen had reported sightings of a large male crocodile in the channel, a short distance downstream, and a goat belonging to a neighboring homestead had disappeared from the riverbank 2 weeks earlier, under circumstances consistent with crocodile predation. Matanga had not communicated these reports to guests or staff, nor had he restricted access to the inlet. The lodge's liability waiver, signed by all guests upon arrival, contained a single line referencing general wildlife risk, but made no specific mention of crocodiles or waterborne hazards. The afternoon of September 14th was hot, with temperatures exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit by early afternoon. Several guests retreated to their rooms. Marsden descended the pathway to the inlet at approximately 3 o'clock, carrying a paperback novel and a towel. One other guest, seated on the deck above, observed her settle on the sandy bank and wade into the shallows, roughly knee-deep and some distance from the water's edge. The water was murky with suspended sediment, visibility below the surface limited to inches. Nile crocodiles are Africa's largest freshwater predator, and among the most dangerous reptiles on Earth, estimated to be responsible for hundreds of human deaths annually across the continent, though precise figures are difficult to verify due to underreporting in rural areas. Adult males commonly exceed 14 feet in length and can weigh over 1,100 pounds, with the largest specimens approaching 17 feet or more. Crocodiles are ambush predators of extraordinary patience, capable of remaining motionless and nearly invisible in shallow, murky water for extended periods, while waiting for prey to approach within striking distance. Their attack begins with an explosive lunge from concealment, the powerful tail propelling the body forward with enough force to clear the waterline entirely. The initial bite secures the prey with interlocking conical teeth designed to grip rather than cut, generating enough force to crush bone and hold prey immovable. Once secured, the crocodile drags its prey into deeper water to drown it, a process that can take several minutes depending on the size of the victim. The death roll, a rapid spinning of the crocodile's entire body along its longitudinal axis, is employed to disorient drowning prey and to tear limbs from larger carcasses, though it is typically initiated after the prey has been pulled into sufficient depth for the maneuver. The crocodile had likely been resting against the submerged base of the sandbar for some time, its dark body indistinguishable from the muddy bottom. Local fishermen had reported a large male in this stretch of tributary over several years, and its length was later estimated at roughly 14 feet, based on track measurements and prior sightings. Its position placed it within striking distance of where Marsden stood in the shallows. The guest on the deck above saw the water erupt. The crocodile lunged forward from its concealed position, its jaws closing around Marsden's right leg above the knee. The bite secured its grip instantly, the conical teeth puncturing deep into the muscle and locking against the bone. Marsden collapsed backward into the water as the crocodile immediately began pulling her toward the deeper channel, its powerful tail driving both bodies through the shallows with shocking speed. The guest on the deck began shouting, bringing 2 lodge staff members running toward the inlet. By the time they reached the waterline, the crocodile had dragged Marsden some distance into the deeper water beyond the sandbar. Her upper body was still intermittently visible as she struggled against the pull, but the crocodile's grip on her leg appeared immovable. The force of the drag had likely already caused serious injuries to her lower leg. As the crocodile reached sufficient depth, it initiated the death roll, its massive body rotating violently while maintaining the grip on Marsden's leg. The spinning disoriented and submerged her completely, preventing any possibility of keeping her head above water. The surface churned with violent muddy turbulence for several seconds before going still. The crocodile had pulled her beneath the surface entirely. Lodge staff were unable to enter the water without risking additional attack. Matanga radioed for assistance, reaching the nearest wildlife authority post sometime later. A response team arrived by boat within several hours, but the crocodile and its prey had disappeared into the deeper channel. Search efforts continued for 2 days before Marsden's partial remains were recovered some distance downstream, where the remains had become lodged beneath a submerged tree root, consistent with crocodile caching behavior. According to Zimbabwe's National Wildlife Authority, the lodge had failed to implement protective measures despite what investigators believed was documented awareness of crocodile activity in the area. The liability waiver was found to be insufficient, with investigators noting the absence of specific hazard warnings at the water's edge. Matanga was reportedly subject to investigation, and the lodge was believed to have been temporarily closed pending safety modifications. The crocodile was never identified or captured, as removing a single animal would not eliminate the ongoing risk. It was June 14, 2015, and the afternoon sun hung heavy over Chobe National Park in Botswana, turning the landscape into a shimmering expanse of golden grass and scattered acacia trees. The remote northern sector stretched for miles, a wilderness where tourist traffic was minimal, and wildlife moved with the confidence of creatures that rarely encountered humans. Temperatures hovered near 95 degrees, and the seasonal waterhole had become a critical gathering point for elephant herds. Marcus Holbrook adjusted his Canon camera lens, his fingers moving with practiced precision. At 42 years old, the Denver-based wildlife photographer had built a respectable reputation, capturing African wildlife. His wife Jennifer sat beside him in the Land Cruiser, reviewing the shots they'd captured that morning. The Holbrooks had arrived in Botswana 5 days earlier, their third trip to Africa in as many years. They were serious photographers who invested in top-tier equipment. Marcus specialized in elephant photography, fascinated by their complex social structures. Their guide was Kabo Motswana, a local who had been guiding tourists for 12 years. He'd developed a sixth sense for reading animal behavior and agreed to take the Holbrooks into the park's remote northern sector, where the elephants were less accustomed to vehicles. In the mid-afternoon, they spotted what Marcus had been hoping for: a herd of approximately 15 elephants gathered around a seasonal waterhole. The group included several young calves, but it was the matriarch that caught Marcus's attention. She was massive, easily identifiable by her broken right tusk. Marcus had his camera out before Kabo even brought the vehicle to a complete stop. He positioned his tripod outside the Land Cruiser's open side door. The park's regulations were clear. Visitors were supposed to remain inside their vehicles at all times, but enforcement in these remote areas was practically non-existent. The elephants appeared completely at ease. Then, just minutes into his recording, everything changed. One of the younger calves wandered away from its mother, moving toward the vehicle. It approached to within 20 feet of where Marcus stood. The matriarch noticed. Her ears flared outward. She raised her trunk high and released a trumpet call that echoed across the waterhole. Every other elephant in the herd froze. African elephants are the largest land animals on Earth, with adult females weighing between 6,000 and 7,000 pounds and standing up to 9 feet tall at the shoulder. But their size isn't what makes them dangerous. It's their intelligence and their fierce protective instincts. Elephant matriarchs will defend their family members with lethal force when necessary. They can run at speeds up to 25 miles per hour, despite their massive size, and a charging elephant generates enough momentum to flip vehicles, crush bones, and kill with a single strike. Kabo called out for Marcus to get inside. The matriarch was going to charge. Marcus hesitated. The matriarch was moving now, walking with heavy, deliberate steps directly toward them. He reached for his tripod, trying to collapse the extended legs, but the locking mechanisms were stiff. Jennifer had already scrambled back into the vehicle. The matriarch broke into a full charge, her ears pinned back, her trunk curled under her body, and her head lowered with her tusks pointing forward. Marcus dropped his tripod and dove toward the Land Cruiser's open door. His hands found the door frame just as Kabo threw the vehicle into reverse. Marcus was half inside, his legs still dangling outside, when the matriarch reached them. Her massive head struck the vehicle's side panel with the force of a wrecking ball. The entire Land Cruiser rocked violently. Marcus's grip on the doorframe was the only thing keeping him from being thrown out. The matriarch rammed again, this time catching the rear quarter panel. The impact left a deeply caved-in panel and shattered the rear window. Safety glass exploded inward. Cabo kept his foot pressed to the floor, but the Land Rover's reverse speed was limited, and the Elephant was faster. The matriarch charged alongside the reversing vehicle. She swung her head sideways, and the impact knocked Marcus's grip loose. He fell from the vehicle, hitting the ground hard. Before he could even attempt to stand, the matriarch was on him. Her tusks came down with devastating force, goring through his chest. The massive elephant pressed her weight onto him, crushing his ribcage and vital organs. Marcus's body went still within seconds. Cabo slammed on the brakes. The matriarch stood over Marcus's body, trumpeting aggressively at the vehicle. Jennifer remained inside the Land Cruiser, while Cabo physically blocked her from attempting to exit. Any movement toward the matriarch would likely result in another attack. Cabo radioed for emergency assistance while keeping the vehicle at a safe distance. The matriarch remained standing over Marcus's body for nearly 10 minutes before finally returning to her herd. The other elephants had remained in a defensive formation throughout the entire incident, protecting the calves while their matriarch dealt with the perceived threat. Park rangers arrived within the hour. They confirmed Marcus was dead at the scene. Massive chest trauma and internal injuries incompatible with life. Officials reviewed Marcus's recovered footage. The video clearly showed the Holbrooks operating their cameras outside the vehicle, a direct violation of park regulations. Jennifer was issued a citation but no fine, given the circumstances. The matriarch and her herd showed no unusual behavior afterward. Wildlife officials noted that she had simply done what any protective mother would do. The footage Marcus captured in his final moments was used in park safety training videos as a cautionary tale, but was never released to the public. Park officials determined that out of respect for Jennifer and the Holbrook family, the graphic nature of the attack should remain restricted to professional training contexts only. It was October 3, 2018, the late afternoon sun hanging low over the lower Zambezi National Park in Zambia, casting amber light across the muddy riverbanks, where the water moved slow and dark. Derek Lindell, a 35-year-old amateur wildlife photographer from Minneapolis, crouched near the water's edge. His camera lens focused on the pattern of ripples where the current met the shore. Derek worked as an IT consultant but lived for his photography trips. His apartment walls were covered with framed prints from previous expeditions to Costa Rica, Kenya, and Thailand. Colleagues described him as meticulous in his work, but impulsive when traveling, often venturing closer to wildlife than guides recommended. He had arrived in Zambia 5 days earlier with a small photography tour group on a specialized photography expedition along the riverbank, spending each day along the Zambezi's banks, trying to capture the perfect shot of the river ecosystem at golden hour. His reputation within the tour group had already raised concerns. On 2 previous outings, guides had warned him about standing too close to the water's edge. They said that Derek's method involved positioning himself as near to his subjects as possible, believing proximity created intimacy in his photographs. He had dismissed crocodile warnings, noting that he had seen none during their walks. A Zambian guide named Bello had specifically told the group that morning about recent crocodile activity along their planned route. The riverbank where Derek positioned himself that afternoon was deceptively treacherous. The mud sloped gradually toward the water, becoming increasingly unstable near the edge where crocodiles preferred to wait. Nile crocodiles are among Africa's most dangerous predators, capable of growing over 16 feet long and weighing more than 1,600 pounds. They can remain motionless in murky water for hours, with only their eyes and nostrils breaking the surface, before exploding forward in a short burst that can cover several feet in less than a second. Their bite force measures more than 3,500 pounds per square inch, among the most powerful recorded in the animal kingdom, and their hunting technique relies on the death roll, a spinning maneuver that tears flesh and breaks bones while disorienting prey. The group had arrived at the location around 5:15 p.m. Bello positioned the tourists on a raised area about 35 feet from the water, pointing out safe vantage points. Derek nodded, but gradually moved closer, drawn by the light reflecting off the water's surface. Exposed tree roots created natural obstacles along the slope, and the mud bore the slick sheen of recent rain. Bello called out twice for Derek to step back, but the photographer waved him off, adjusting his telephoto lens. The guides were supervising but allowed limited solo positioning because of Derek's previous photography experience. At approximately 5:45 p.m., Derek shifted his weight, likely to get a better angle. His right foot caught on a thick root protruding from the mud. He stumbled forward, arms windmilling as he tried to regain balance. His left foot plunged into the shallow water at the river's edge, sinking into soft sediment. For perhaps 2 seconds, nothing happened. Then the water exploded. The crocodile lunged from its position just below the surface, its massive jaws clamping around Derek's calf with audible force. The initial bite crushed through muscle and scraped bone, the conical teeth locking into flesh. Derek screamed, a raw sound of shock and pain, as he fell backward onto the muddy slope. The crocodile began its death roll immediately, thrashing and spinning in the shallow water, rolling as far as it could in the mud and water, while grinding Derek's leg against exposed roots and sediment. After Derek's fall prevented it from dragging him straight into deeper water, Derek's leg twisted unnaturally, the knee joint rotating past its normal range. The crocodile completed a violent rotation, then struggled to roll further, each movement crushing the shattered bones against each other. Derek clawed at the mud, trying desperately to pull himself up the bank, but the slippery surface offered no purchase. Bello and another guide rushed down the slope. The other guide grabbed a thick branch and jabbed it hard at the crocodile's snout, while Bello seized Derek under the arms. The crocodile released momentarily as the branch strike disrupted its grip. In that 3-second window, they dragged Derek slightly toward deeper water. But the crocodile lunged again, re-gripping Derek's already mangled leg just above the ankle. The second round of rolling was worse. The crocodile thrashed side to side, its tail creating waves in the shallow water. Derek's tibia fractured completely. The attack lasted approximately 90 seconds in total before the crocodile finally retreated into deeper water. A park ranger stationed a quarter-mile away heard the commotion and arrived in a vehicle after roughly 6 minutes due to the terrain. By the time they reached him, Derek was unresponsive, his body showing catastrophic trauma from the bite and death rolls. Attempts at resuscitation failed. Derek Lindell was pronounced dead at the scene, having suffered massive crush injuries, severed tendons, and exsanguination from the attack. It was May 21st, 2014, the late afternoon sun casting amber light across the Chobe River as the aluminum safari boat drifted along the water's edge in northern Botswana. Within the hour, the tranquil sunset cruise would transform into a nightmare that would leave passengers traumatized by what they witnessed in those blood-stained waters. Dennis Albright was a 61-year-old retired electrical contractor from Chicago, Illinois. He had spent 35 years working on commercial construction projects throughout the Midwest, earning a reputation as meticulous and detail-oriented but also stubborn. A man who believed his experience and judgment trumped most advice others offered. His wife had passed away 3 years earlier from cancer, and this trip through southern Africa was his first major travel since her death. Friends who knew him well said Dennis had always been the type to push boundaries. This tour through Botswana was part of a 2-week safari package he had booked through a Chicago-based travel agency. The group consisted of 8 passengers, mostly American retirees, led by a veteran boat captain named Kago Motsumi. Dennis had told fellow travelers he planned to submit his wildlife photographs to several nature magazines, though he had no prior publication history. The safari boat moved slowly along the Chobe riverfront that evening, its engine idling as passengers photographed elephants drinking at the water's edge. Around 5:45 p.m., a pod of approximately 7 hippopotamuses surfaced roughly 50 to 100 feet from the boat. Inside the distance, most guides consider risky for close water-level viewing. Kago barked for everyone to remain seated, keep their arms inside the boat, and remain completely still. Life jackets were stowed but had been recommended. Hippopotamuses are among the most dangerous animals in Africa, responsible for an estimated 500 human deaths annually, according to wildlife experts. Their massive jaws are not designed for chewing vegetation but for fighting, capable of crushing human torsos or injuring crocodiles. Hippos are territorial and extremely aggressive when they feel threatened, particularly in water where they spend most of their time, and a rapid side-to-side shake of the head is used to tear apart perceived threats. Dennis, seated near the middle of the vessel, stood and moved toward the front bow anyway. He positioned himself at the railing, leaning forward with his camera raised. Another passenger told him he should sit back down. Kago repeated his warning more firmly, but Dennis waved dismissively and leaned farther over the edge for a better angle, the heavy zoom pulling on his neck strap. His focus was entirely on the viewfinder as the hippos surfaced again, now about 50 feet away. As one particularly large hippo rose from the water, Dennis shifted his weight across the railing to adjust his shot. His heavy zoom snagged on the railing, the neck strap hooked, and the camera's leverage pulled him forward. Before anyone could grab him, he pitched forward headfirst into the river between the boat and the pod. The splash caused immediate panic among the passengers. Kago cut the engine, tossed a life ring, and backed the boat away while radioing park rangers, knowing that approaching a pod of agitated hippos would be suicidal. Dennis surfaced once, coughing and thrashing about 6 feet from the boat. He shouted for help, his arms flailing as he tried to swim back. Several passengers reached toward him, but the current had already pulled him farther away. The nearest hippo, which had been watching from the surface, suddenly disappeared beneath the water without a sound. For perhaps 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the surface exploded upward as the hippo surged from below with tremendous force. Witnesses saw the animal's jaw gaped, then closed on his torso with crushing force. Dennis disappeared beneath the surface instantly, pulled under by the hippo's weight. The animal resurfaced about 10 feet away, thrashing violently and shaking its head from side to side, a behavior hippos use to tear apart threats. Dennis's body was visible briefly in the hippo's jaws, before both submerged again. The water around the attack site turned dark red, spreading outward in thick clouds. The hippo surfaced once more, alone, before diving and disappearing into the murky depths. Kago immediately cut the engine, ordered passengers flat and still, tossed a life ring, and maneuvered the boat away while radioing park rangers. Rangers arrived approximately 40 minutes later, just after last light, but approaching darkness and the continued presence of multiple agitated hippos forced them to suspend recovery efforts. The remaining passengers were evacuated to shore, several requiring medical attention for shock. Dennis's body was located the following morning. The remains showed massive crush injuries to the chest and abdomen, multiple deep punctures consistent with hippocanines, shattered ribs, and catastrophic internal hemorrhage. The medical examiner determined death was rapidly fatal from massive chest trauma and hemorrhage caused by the initial bite. Park authorities issued a brief statement reminding visitors that wildlife viewing regulations existed for their protection and must be followed without exception. Kago Motsumi continued operating tours, but implemented stricter safety protocols, including requiring passengers to sign detailed waivers acknowledging the risks of approaching hippos. The summer of August 15, 2017 brought perfect safari conditions to Kenya's Masai Mara. Golden grasslands stretched endlessly under the scorching sun, and for Helen Rodriguez, a 42-year-old high school principal from Phoenix, this wasn't just another vacation. This was the dream trip she and her husband had saved 3 years to afford. Helen and her husband were celebrating their 20th wedding anniversary, and he was determined to document every moment with his handheld video camera. They were the perfect couple for an African adventure, both nature enthusiasts who had spent months planning this once-in-a-lifetime safari experience. What her husband captured on camera that day would become evidence in a tragic investigation. Their experienced guide had positioned the vehicle about 30 meters from a pride of lions resting under an acacia tree. He'd been leading safaris for 15 years and knew the perfect distance for photography while maintaining safety. But even the most experienced guides can't control human behavior when the desire for the perfect shot takes over. African lions are apex predators that can weigh up to 420 pounds and reach speeds of 35 miles per hour. Male lions are particularly territorial and aggressive, especially when protecting their pride. Their powerful jaws deliver a bite force of over 650 pounds per square inch, while their razor-sharp claws can grow up to 3 inches long. Helen had been taking photos from her seated position when she noticed her husband struggling to get clear shots over the vehicle's side panels. Despite the guide's repeated warnings that passengers must remain seated at all times, Helen made a decision that would cost her everything. She slowly stood up, gripping the roll bar for support, positioning herself for what she believed would be the perfect anniversary photo. The guide immediately began speaking firmly, telling her to sit down, but Helen was already leaning over the vehicle's side, lost in the excitement of capturing the African wilderness behind her. Her husband kept filming, completely unaware that he was about to document the most horrific moment of his life. That's when everything went catastrophically wrong. The footage shows the big male lion suddenly looking up at Helen's movement and the sound of her shifting position. The massive cat rose to his feet, ears forward, alert to this unusual disturbance. Helen finally realized something was wrong and panicked, accidentally stepping backward and losing her footing on the vehicle's edge. She tumbled out of the safari vehicle, landing hard on the ground with a loud thud just meters from the now alert lion. The sudden noise and movement startled the lion, triggering its defensive instinct. He charged the remaining distance in seconds. The camera captured the moment of impact as the massive predator launched himself at Helen, but then the footage became pure chaos, shaking violently as her panicked husband forgot he was still recording. Through the disoriented footage, you can hear the guide desperately revving the engine and honking the horn. The guide followed proper protocol, slowly driving the vehicle toward the lion while making as much noise as possible to intimidate the predator. The loud commotion caused the lion to disengage and retreat toward his pride, but the damage was already done. A medical helicopter was dispatched from the nearest airstrip and arrived within 40 minutes. Helen was airlifted to Nairobi Hospital in critical condition, but despite emergency surgery to repair extensive injuries to her neck and shoulders, she succumbed to massive blood loss and trauma-related complications 6 hours after the attack. Investigation revealed that Helen had violated multiple safety protocols by standing in the vehicle and leaning outside its protective boundaries. The footage from her husband's camera provided clear evidence of the sequence of events and was reviewed by investigators as part of their incident analysis. The couple's anniversary celebration became a nightmare that would haunt the surviving husband forever. The footage he had intended as a happy memory became evidence in a tragic investigation that would be used in training programs for safari operators. It was September 12, 2015. The late afternoon sun casting amber light across the reeds of the Okavango Delta. At the helm of a small aluminum motorboat, Cabello, a 19-year-old guide in training, eased the bow away from the main channel and toward a thin break in the papyrus. Cabello had grown up in Maun, the dusty gateway town on the southern edge of the delta, where tourism underpinned nearly every household. His father worked maintenance at a mid-range lodge, repairing generators and patching walkways between guest tents. His mother sold hand-woven baskets and carved animals at a roadside stall, frequented by tour vans. From a young age, Cabello had watched safari guides move easily between worlds, fluent in English and Setswana, confident on the water, respected by both lodge managers and visitors. The job promised something rare in Maun: stability, tips paid in foreign currency, and a future that did not depend entirely on seasonal labor. After finishing secondary school, Cabello secured an apprenticeship with a budget motorboat operation that catered primarily to backpackers and gap-year travelers. The company ran on thin margins and thinner oversight. Boats were turned around quickly, maintenance was reactive rather than scheduled, and junior staff were promoted to solo runs as soon as they demonstrated basic competence. Cabello received a short orientation, shadowed a senior guide for a handful of trips, and was soon entrusted with his own excursions. There was no formal certification process and no written examination on wildlife behavior beyond general warnings delivered during morning briefings. In just 3 months, Cabello learned the main arteries of the delta well enough to move between camps without incident. He could read surface currents, avoid visible sandbanks, and manage the temperamental outboard motor with passable confidence. What he lacked was a deeper understanding of hippo-territorial behavior and seasonal movement patterns, knowledge typically acquired over years, often through close calls and hard-earned caution. This particular trip was meant to be uncomplicated, a late-afternoon sunset photography excursion with a single German tourist out along the main channel and back before dusk. The guest had requested water-level shots and reed-line reflections, nothing out of the ordinary. Hippopotamuses are estimated to cause several hundred human deaths in Africa each year, making them among the continent's deadliest large animals. Bull hippos, especially solitary males, are aggressively territorial, defending stretches of water they use for resting and access routes to grazing areas. During the dry season, when water levels drop and channels constrict, these territories overlap, and tensions increase. An adult male can weigh up to 4,000 pounds, and despite its size, can sprint short distances on land at speeds approaching 20 miles per hour. Its jaws can open to nearly 150 degrees, exposing thick, curved canines that can reach approximately 18 inches in length. The bite force generated when those jaws close is sufficient to crush bone, shear through aluminum, and split small boats. The channel Cabello chose was barely 15 feet wide at its widest point, hemmed in by papyrus reeds that rose well above head height. Earlier that morning, during the operation's informal safety briefing, a senior guide had specifically mentioned increased hippo activity in side channels due to dropping water levels. Several routes were identified as off-limits until the next flood cycle. According to later statements, Cabello had nodded along with the others, saying nothing. When the boat entered the narrow cut that afternoon, the tourist passenger recalled Cabello mentioning that they were taking a faster way back to camp, adding casually that he knew the area well. What the passenger did not know was that Cabello had navigated this particular channel only once before, months earlier during high water, when depth and visibility made it marginally safer. At that time of year, the reeds sat lower in the water and hippos tended to remain in broader lagoons. In September, conditions were very different. Local fishermen avoided the channel entirely during the dry season, a practice passed down and widely understood among experienced guides. It was not written on any map, but it was common knowledge. By around 4 p.m., the small motorboat idled into the reed corridor, its engine note dull and muted by the vegetation. The main channel lay less than 200 yards to the west, open, sunlit, and carrying the distant sound of other boats. The shortcut promised to save perhaps 10 minutes. Cabello was already behind schedule after a late departure, and the light was beginning to soften toward evening. As the reeds closed in, visibility dropped to under 6 feet. The water darkened with disturbed sediment, opaque and unreadable. The tourist raised his camera, pleased by the sense of immersion, unaware that they had entered the most dangerous terrain possible for a hippo encounter. Moments later, the boat's propeller struck submerged vegetation with a grinding vibration that shuddered through the hull. Cabello immediately cut the throttle. The engine sputtered and fell silent. No kill switch lanyard had been clipped to his wrist, and neither he nor the passenger wore life jackets, omissions that investigators would later cite as basic safety failures. Cabello stood at the stern, leaning over the transom to inspect the motor and clear the fouled propeller. The boat drifted, nearly motionless. The water beside the hull bulged upward without warning. A bull hippo surfaced with explosive force, its massive head breaking through the surface just 3 feet from the aluminum side. Water sheeted off its skin as it exhaled sharply. The animal targeted the source of the mechanical vibration, striking the outboard motor at the stern with a massive upward lunge. The impact shattered the engine's lower unit and pitched the hull sharply to starboard. The impact produced a loud metallic boom that echoed down the channel and sent a shock through the hull. According to the tourist's later account, the sudden lurch threw Cabello off balance and pitched him partially over the gunwale, his lower body plunging into the water, while his upper torso remained caught against the stern. He reached for the motor mount, which was now slick with a mixture of river water and leaking hydraulic fluid from the shattered engine, and failed to secure a grip. The hippo surged again, registering the splashing legs in the water as a direct territorial intrusion. Its jaws opened wide as it lunged upward. The canines closed around Cabello's pelvis, while he was still half submerged, half trapped against the boat. His scream was audible above the reeds, short and abrupt. The force of the jaws functioned like a hydraulic press, fracturing bone and rupturing internal organs. Witness statements indicated that Cabello lost voluntary movement within seconds, his body going slack almost immediately. The tourist remained in the bow, shouting repeatedly for help, his voice carrying but unanswered in the isolated channel. The hippo dragged Cabello beneath the surface with a powerful downward motion. For several seconds, the water boiled and churned, reeds snapping and bending outward. Cabello's head briefly broke the surface, pressed against the animal's jaw, his eyes unfocused and his limbs unresponsive, consistent with rapid loss of consciousness. The hippo submerged again, pulling him under. When they surfaced a final time, there was no visible movement. The tourist managed to restart the engine and maneuver the damaged boat back toward the main channel, then onto the muddy shoreline. He ran along the bank, shouting and waving, until staff from a nearby camp responded and launched a boat. They reached the site approximately 23 minutes later. Cabello's body was recovered downstream, wedged against a fallen tree where the current had slowed. The injuries were catastrophic. Identification was made through his clothing and the operator's passenger manifest. The coroner's report documented massive pelvic disintegration, bilateral femur fractures, extensive soft tissue destruction across the lower abdomen and thighs, and water inhalation. Death was attributed to crushing trauma, followed by fatal blood loss and drowning. The safari operator's license was suspended pending a formal investigation. Findings cited inadequate staff training, failure to enforce route restrictions, and lax safety protocols. The channel was later marked as restricted during low water periods, though enforcement remained inconsistent across operators. Cabello's family received a modest settlement that covered little more than funeral expenses. Within 6 months, another guide in training was hired to fill his position. It was May 17, 2015, and the late autumn sun hung low over Botswana's Chobe district, where unfenced self-drive safari routes offered unrestricted access to some of southern Africa's densest elephant populations. Signage at every park gate warned visitors not to exit their vehicles or approach wildlife on foot. Kobus Steenkamp was a 51-year-old mechanical engineer from Pretoria, whose passion for wildlife photography had driven annual self-drive expeditions across southern Africa for over a decade. He had built a modest online following for his images. His wife, Annika, 48, accompanied him on most trips, but did not share his willingness to push boundaries. Previous expeditions had seen Steenkamp edge their vehicle dangerously close to predators, lean beyond safe limits, and on at least one occasion exit the vehicle briefly for a shot, a violation he had gotten away with without consequence. The couple had arrived in the Chobe area 3 days earlier. The photography had been productive, but Steenkamp had grown frustrated by the distance limitations of shooting from inside the vehicle. The images he wanted required closer proximity and lower angles than his truck's elevated position allowed. The encounter occurred late afternoon along a remote track bordering a seasonal floodplain. A breeding herd of approximately 14 elephants had gathered at a shrinking waterhole roughly 80 meters from the road. Several adult females, juveniles and calves, the youngest no more than a few weeks old. The animals were relaxed, dusting themselves and allowing calves to play in the remaining mud. Steenkamp parked and spent several minutes photographing from the window. The results were adequate, but the distance frustrated him. He announced to Annika that he intended to approach on foot for ground-level shots. Annika objected, referencing park regulations and the presence of young calves. Steenkamp dismissed her concerns, pointing out the elephants appeared calm and that he would stay behind a low termite mound roughly 50 meters from the herd. African elephants are the largest terrestrial animals on Earth, with adult females weighing between 6,000 and 8,000 pounds. Breeding herds are led by experienced matriarchs and are fiercely protective of calves. A cow elephant perceiving a threat to her young will typically issue a warning display, spreading her ears wide, raising her trunk, and mock charging to drive off the intruder. If the threat does not retreat, the warning can escalate to a full charge at reported speeds approaching 25 miles per hour. At full sprint, an elephant covers ground with deceptive speed, and their mass makes any impact with a human body catastrophic. The majority of fatal elephant encounters involving tourists are believed to occur when individuals exit vehicles and approach breeding herds on foot. Steenkamp exited the vehicle and moved in a low crouch toward the termite mound, camera bag slung over one shoulder. He reached the mound and knelt behind it, beginning to shoot ground-level images. For several minutes, the herd continued its activity undisturbed. Then the nearest cow, a large female positioned between Steenkamp and the calves, raised her head and oriented her ears toward his position. Her trunk lifted, sampling the air. The cow issued what observers later described as a warning display, ears flaring wide, trunk swinging, one foot stamping the ground. Steenkamp continued shooting. Annika later told investigators that her husband had waved dismissively, apparently interpreting the display as a bluff, a common misinterpretation among inexperienced observers who fail to recognize the escalation sequence. The cow's posture shifted. Her ears appeared to fold back against her skull. Her trunk curled inward, and her head dropped low. The transition from warning to full charge happened in seconds, the massive body accelerating across the open ground with a speed that defied her size. Steenkamp stood and ran toward the vehicle, roughly 50 meters behind him. He covered less than half the distance. The cow struck Steenkamp from behind, her lowered head slamming into his back with several tons of momentum behind the impact. The force drove him face first into the hard-packed earth. Based on Annika's account and the scene reconstruction, the elephant then stepped on his lower body, the concentrated weight causing severe crushing injuries. She stepped forward, pressing down on his upper body with similarly devastating force. The cow then stepped back, turned, and walked rapidly toward the herd, which had already begun moving away from the commotion. The entire attack lasted less than 15 seconds. The herd disappeared into the tree line within minutes, displaying no further aggression toward the vehicle or Annika inside it. Annika drove to the nearest park gate, roughly 40 minutes away, where she alerted rangers. A response team reached the scene several hours later. Steenkamp was pronounced dead from severe crushing injuries, consistent with an elephant trampling. The investigation was straightforward. Tire tracks and footprints confirmed he had exited the vehicle and approached the herd on foot in direct violation of posted regulations. It was November 12, 2019, and the early morning mist was just beginning to lift over the Sabi River in Kruger National Park. The water moved slowly through this section, creating shallow pools and muddy banks where hippos gathered during the day. The temperature was already climbing, promising another scorching day in the South African bush. Michael Chen and his girlfriend, Lisa Park, were on a guided walking safari, one of the park's premium experiences that allowed tourists to explore on foot with armed rangers. Their guide was Dumisani Mthembu, a ranger with 15 years of experience navigating Kruger's most dangerous areas. The group of 6 tourists had been walking for about an hour when they approached a bend in the river. Dumisani raised his hand, signaling everyone to stop. Through the morning haze, they could see a large hippo resting in the shallows about 50 yards away. Michael pulled out his phone and began recording. The hippo appeared calm, half submerged in the muddy water, seemingly unbothered by their presence. Dumisani explained in a low voice that they would give the hippo a wide berth, circling around through the bush to maintain a safe distance. Hippos were responsible for more human deaths in Africa than any other large animal, he reminded them. Despite their docile appearance, they were extremely territorial and could run at speeds up to 30 miles per hour on land. The group began moving in a wide arc, staying in single file behind Dumisani. Michael continued filming, capturing the hippo as it remained motionless in the water. Then Lisa stumbled. Her foot caught on a root and she fell forward, her backpack hitting the ground with a loud thud. The hippo's head snapped up, its ears rotated forward. For a moment, everything was still. Dumisani instructed the group to remain absolutely still. The hippo was already rising from the water. Its massive body emerged, revealing its true size: over 3,000 pounds of muscle and aggression. Hippos possess enormous jaws that can open to nearly 180 degrees, with canine teeth that can grow up to 20 inches long. Their bite force exceeds 1,800 pounds per square inch, powerful enough to bite a crocodile in half. The hippo began moving toward them, not running yet, but walking with purpose, water streaming off its gray hide. Dumisani positioned himself between the group and the approaching hippo, his rifle ready. The hippo's body language shifted suddenly. Its ears pinned back, and it broke into a full charge, its short legs moving with surprising speed, its mouth opening wide to display massive tusks. The charge was too fast. Dumisani raised his rifle but didn't have time for a clear shot before the hippo was on them. Dumisani fired into the ground directly in front of the charging animal and called out for the group to run for the trees, but the hippo was already committed. The group scattered. Michael's phone footage becomes shaky as he ran, but the audio captures the chaos. The sounds of people running, Dumisani calling out directions, and the thunderous sound of the hippo's charge. Lisa was still recovering from her fall, slower than the others. She ran in the wrong direction, toward open ground instead of the tree line. The hippo, targeting the closest moving figure, pursued her. Michael's camera swung around just in time to capture the moment. The hippo caught Lisa from behind, its massive jaws clamping down on her torso. The bite was catastrophic. The hippo's teeth penetrated deep, crushing ribs and vital organs. The hippo shook its head violently, the way a dog shakes a toy, then threw her aside. She landed several feet away, motionless. Michael called out Lisa's name as he stumbled, another tourist grabbing him before he could run toward her. The other members of the group had reached the tree line and were calling for Michael to keep moving to safety. Dumisani fired multiple shots into the air and at the ground near the hippo. The animal bellowed, turned, and charged back toward the river, crashing through the shallows before disappearing into deeper water. The ranger immediately positioned himself between the tourists and Lisa's body, scanning the area for any sign the hippo might return while simultaneously assessing whether there was any chance of survival. Dumisani ran to Lisa. The hippo's bite had caused massive trauma. She had died almost instantly. Dumisani radioed for emergency evacuation while keeping watch on the river. The hippo remained in the deeper water, visible only as a dark shape beneath the surface. A helicopter arrived within 40 minutes. Lisa's body was airlifted out along with the traumatized group. Officials reviewed Michael's footage. Their investigation determined that Lisa's fall had triggered the hippo's territorial response, and her subsequent movement in the wrong direction made her the most accessible target. The attack was classified as defensive behavior typical of hippos when they perceive a threat near their water source. The hippo was monitored by park rangers, but no action was taken to remove it from the area. Park officials used the incident to reinforce safety protocols for walking safaris, emphasizing the unpredictable nature of hippo encounters and the importance of maintaining distance from water sources. Michael's footage was submitted as evidence during the investigation, but Kruger National Park officials made the decision to keep it permanently sealed. The footage was deemed too graphic for any public or training purpose, and officials stated that existing educational materials on hippo behavior were sufficient. The decision was also made out of consideration for Lisa's family, who requested that no images or video of her final moments ever be released. South African authorities granted this request, and the footage remains locked in official archives, accessible only to investigators with specific authorization. It was March 15, 2014, and the Serengeti plains shimmered under a midday sun that offered no mercy. Elias Brandt knelt in golden grass approximately 60 feet from a pride of lions, his field notebook open beside him, entirely focused on a cluster of rare specimens. Elias Brandt was a 29-year-old botanist from New Orleans, Louisiana, known throughout his field for his extensive work cataloging rare African grasses. His colleagues at a university described him as meticulous in his documentation, but dangerously impulsive. Over 6 years, he had published 14 papers on East African flora and had spent cumulative months camping in remote territories across Kenya and Tanzania. His research funding came from a combination of academic grants and private conservation organizations that valued his willingness to venture into areas other botanists avoided. This expedition focused on a grass species rarely documented in predator-dense areas of the Serengeti. Elias had requested access to sections where recent rainfall created ideal growing conditions. His permit allowed only vehicle-based observation with a guide present, and park records show he signed a safety waiver and attended a wildlife encounter briefing. Among colleagues, he was known to bend rules when rare specimens were involved, something that would later prove fatal. The landscape stretched endlessly in waves of gold and green, punctuated by scattered acacia trees casting insufficient shade. A pride of 6 lions lounged roughly 60 feet from where Elias had positioned himself, their bodies relaxed, but their eyes tracking movement across the grassland. African lions are apex predators weighing up to about 420 pounds, capable of reaching speeds of nearly 50 miles per hour in short bursts. Their hunting strategy relies on ambush tactics, with attacks often triggered by prey behavior such as crouching, running, or approaching too close to cubs or resting areas. That morning, Elias's guide, a Tanzanian named Joseph Kimathi, had warned him 3 times about maintaining minimum safe distances. Park regulations required visitors to remain at least 100 feet from any lion pride, a rule Kimathi had emphasized before they left the vehicle. As Elias spotted the grass cluster he sought, he had gestured toward it and began walking, ignoring Kimathi's raised voice. The guide had radioed for backup and followed on foot, physically gesturing for Elias to return to the vehicle. Other tourists in a nearby Land Cruiser had noticed the situation, one lifting binoculars. They said that Elias crouched low, extending his hand toward the grass. One of the lions, a mature male with a partial mane, lifted its head sharply and fixed its gaze on the crouched figure, a posture that can trigger a predatory or defensive response when a human resembles typical prey behavior. Kimathi shouted a final warning and moved closer, now standing between the vehicle and Elias. The other lions remained still, but their attention had shifted. Elias pulled a small specimen bag from his vest pocket, apparently satisfied with his find. He was reaching for a second cluster when the male lion rose to its feet. The attack came without sound. The lion covered the distance in a few explosive bounds, reaching Elias before he could stand. Its jaws clamped onto his left shoulder, canines puncturing through the collarbone with audible cracking. Elias staggered backward, but the lion's weight drove him to the ground. Witnesses reported seeing his legs kick once, before the animal dragged him approximately 5 feet into taller grass. His screams were high-pitched and brief. Kimathi pulled a licensed ranger-issued rifle from the vehicle rack and fired 2 warning shots into the air, the reports echoing across the plains. The lion maintained its grip, locking its jaws into Elias's upper shoulder and pressing down with its full body weight, a restraint technique used by big cats to immobilize prey. The attack lasted between 15 and 20 seconds, with the lion's teeth tearing through Elias's upper torso. His right arm flailed briefly before going limp. The remaining pride members watched, but did not approach. Kimathi fired a 3rd shot directly over the attacking lion, which finally released its grip and retreated 10 feet. Elias lay motionless in crushed grass, his shoulder torn open, exposing bone and severed muscle. Kimathi radioed the park ranger station immediately. The rough terrain required 15 minutes for the emergency vehicle to arrive. Elias was unconscious and unresponsive when rangers reached him. They administered basic first aid and applied pressure bandages to his shoulder and neck wounds, while attempting to slow heavy bleeding that could not be fully controlled in the field before transporting him to the vehicle. An emergency helicopter evacuation was requested, arriving 40 minutes after the initial call after dispatch clearance and flight time from the regional ranger airstrip. Elias was airlifted to a medical clinic in Arusha, arriving approximately 90 minutes after the attack. However, medical staff pronounced him dead upon arrival. The wildlife authorities conducted a standard investigation, concluding that Elias had violated multiple safety protocols by approaching an active lion pride on foot. His field notebook and collected botanical samples were returned to Tulane University. It was September 2nd, 2015. The Mara River churned with mud and anticipation as hundreds of wildebeest gathered along its northern bank. their grunts echoing across the savannah where Ingrid Solberg positioned her camera equipment. Ingrid Solberg was a 38-year-old freelance architectural photographer from Oslo, Norway, known among colleagues for her meticulous composition and willingness to work in challenging conditions. She had spent the previous decade photographing Scandinavian modernist buildings, but recent shifts in the industry had pushed her toward more marketable subjects. Wildlife and landscape photography offered broader commercial appeal, and Ingrid had spent the past 6 months building a portfolio focused on African ecosystems. She approached wildlife photography with the same technical precision she applied to buildings, studying angles, light, and perspective with methodical attention. For her Masai Mara trip, Ingrid hired Francis Olakire, a guide with 15 years' experience. She requested a full-day private safari at the wildebeest crossing for portfolio-quality shots, paying a premium for exclusive access. She arrived with 3 cameras, multiple lenses, and detailed notes on water action photography. They arrived at the crossing point mid-morning, where several safari vehicles had already positioned along the elevated bank. Hundreds of wildebeest massed on the opposite shore, their collective weight beginning to push the front ranks toward the water's edge. And beneath lies a deadly predator. Nile crocodiles are Africa's largest crocodilian. They hunt primarily through ambush, remaining motionless on riverbeds for hours before producing very rapid short bursts in water, enabling explosive vertical strikes from the bottom. During crossings, they position themselves in murky water where visibility is near zero, timing strikes to coincide with maximum chaos when prey animals are most vulnerable. Francis parked the Land Cruiser roughly 30 feet above the waterline and reminded her that visitors must remain in vehicles except at designated viewing or picnic points, a rule enforced across the reserve. He told Ingrid that tourists must remain on the bank at all times. Ingrid repeatedly mentioned that she wanted a low-angle shot from the waterline to capture the animals at eye level as they swam past. Francis refused directly, telling her that people were never allowed into the river at crossing sites. As the crossing began and the first wildebeest plunged into the brown water, Ingrid walked down the muddy slope carrying her camera. He stepped between her and the water and radioed the camp immediately. Guides are trained not to enter the river because they would likely become additional victims. She walked around him without speaking and continued toward the water's edge. A Swedish couple watching from their own Land Cruiser roughly 30 feet above the bank had a clear view as Ingrid stepped into the shallows. She moved about 10 feet into the water, the river reaching just above her knees as she crouched slightly to frame the animals swimming past. The current pushed against her legs with steady pressure. Wildebeest thrashed through the water roughly 20 yards downstream, their panicked swimming sending ripples across the surface. The water near Ingrid appeared calm except for gentle eddies around her submerged calves. According to the Swedish witnesses, she had been in the river less than 30 seconds, adjusting her camera settings and shifting her stance for better composition. Without visible warning, the water beside her exploded upward. A large crocodile lunged, producing a sudden upward strike. Ingrid screamed once, a short, piercing sound that carried across the water before being cut off as the crocodile pulled her sideways into deeper water. Francis ran to the edge of the bank, but stopped short of entering, knowing that doing so would accomplish nothing except creating a second victim. The crocodile began its death roll immediately, rotating its entire body underwater with Ingrid locked in its jaws. The muddy water erupted in violent churn, throwing spray 6 feet into the air. Within seconds, the visible struggle ceased. The crocodile submerged completely, dragging the body downstream beneath the water. A spreading pattern of disturbed sediment marked its path. The entire attack, from initial strike to final submersion, lasted less than 15 seconds. Francis radioed rangers immediately from his vehicle. Officers arrived within about half an hour due to difficult access along the riverbank, but could not locate either the crocodile or Ingrid's body. The river's strong current and poor visibility made underwater search impossible. A recovery operation conducted the following morning found partial remains nearly half a mile downstream, caught in submerged vegetation. Remains showed catastrophic torso trauma, typical of large crocodile predation, and signs consistent with drowning. Forensic investigators concluded predation and submersion were the cause. The crossing point remained open to safari vehicles, though authorities installed additional warning signs the following year. Her death highlighted the persistent gap between professional ambition and wildlife danger, a reminder that technical skill with equipment offers no protection against predators operating in their element. October 12, 2014 was the perfect conditions for South Africa's exclusive Sabi Sands Game Reserve. For a 38-year-old semi-professional photographer, Sarah Jane from Dublin, this specialized photo hide program represented the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to capture intimate leopard behavior that would establish her reputation among the world's top wildlife photographers. Sarah had been building her portfolio for nature magazines for over 8 years, specializing in wildlife subjects that she sold to publications. This South African assignment represented her most ambitious project yet, and she'd paid premium rates for what she believed would be the safest way to photograph one of Africa's most secretive predators. The hide was equipped with professional camera mounts and had been used safely by hundreds of photographers over the past decade. Constructed of natural materials and positioned just 10 meters from a waterhole, it provided unprecedented close-up opportunities while remaining completely concealed from wildlife. The reserve required all photographers to maintain radio contact with the main lodge, checking in every hour for safety purposes. She had also placed a video camera on a tripod outside the hide, positioned to film her photography session and capture the leopard's behavior from a different angle. The external camera would provide valuable footage of her work process and create a comprehensive documentary of her experience. African leopards are solitary, nocturnal predators that can weigh up to 200 pounds and are considered pound for pound the strongest of the big cats. They are exceptional climbers with incredible stealth and speed, able to accelerate from 0 to 36 miles per hour in seconds. Their bite force exceeds 400 pounds per square inch, while their retractable claws can grow up to 2 inches long and are razor-sharp for gripping prey. A magnificent male leopard had approached the waterhole just as she'd hoped, moving with the fluid grace that made these cats such compelling photographic subjects. She began capturing frame after frame as the leopard drank, while her external video camera continued filming the entire encounter. The leopard finished drinking and began moving around the waterhole, his keen senses detecting something unusual about the photography hide. Male leopards are extremely territorial and investigate any changes in their environment with suspicious aggression. Sarah continued shooting as the leopard moved around the area, but suddenly the big cat disappeared from her view, vanishing into the dense vegetation with the silent stealth that made leopards such effective hunters. She waited patiently for several minutes, hoping the leopard would reappear for more shots. When her scheduled radio check-in time arrived, she made a decision that would cost her everything. She ignored the protocol, so focused on the potential for the perfect shot that she didn't want to risk the radio static scaring away the leopard if it returned. The lodge staff tried to reach her twice more over the next hour, but she had turned her radio volume down to avoid any noise. Concerned that her external video camera might have stopped recording or shifted position, Sarah made the fatal decision to leave the safety of the hide to check her equipment. She had been assured that the hide was completely safe and that leopards typically moved away from the area once they finished drinking. She quietly opened the hide's entrance and stepped outside to adjust her video camera, which appeared to have shifted slightly on its tripod. She was focused entirely on repositioning the camera when the leopard, who had been resting in nearby vegetation, detected her scent and movement through his acute senses. The 180-pound leopard launched his attack from less than 10 feet away, using his natural ambush hunting instincts to strike with explosive force. Sarah had no warning as the big cat's powerful legs propelled him through the air, claws extended and jaws open wide. The leopard's claws raked across her back and shoulders, opening deep gashes while his powerful jaws sought purchase on her neck. Her screams echoed across the waterhole, but she was alone and miles from any assistance. The attack was swift and methodical, the leopard's natural hunting instincts driving him to eliminate this perceived threat to his territory. Sarah's movements ceased within seconds as the leopard's swift and methodical assault overwhelmed her system. The big cat remained with her body for several minutes, his territorial instincts satisfied, before disappearing into the gathering darkness. When Sarah failed to respond to multiple radio calls, lodge staff immediately dispatched a search team. They discovered her remains the following morning. Her external video camera had captured the initial moments when she left the hide, but the footage became chaotic once the attack began, showing only brief glimpses of movement before the camera was knocked over. The investigation revealed that Sarah had violated safety protocols by leaving the hide during an active leopard encounter and ignoring mandatory radio check-ins. Her death led to immediate safety upgrades at photography hides throughout the reserve, including mandatory GPS tracking devices and automatic emergency alerts when radio protocols are violated. Sarah's tragic end became part of enhanced safety training programs, showing both the stealth capabilities of these apex predators and the deadly consequences of breaking established safety protocols. Her family used the investigation findings to advocate for stricter safety measures at wildlife photography facilities across Africa. Her camera equipment, found scattered around the waterhole, contained over 200 images from that final session, a portfolio that would never be completed. It was July 14, 2018, the winter sun hanging low over the Free State grasslands of South Africa, when Leonid Baran made the fatal mistake of transforming himself from part of a large, non-threatening vehicle into a separate, vulnerable target in the eyes of a protective mother. The 18-year-old exchange student had arrived in South Africa just 6 weeks earlier as part of a summer exchange program through his community college in Riverside, California. He had enrolled in the program impulsively, encouraged by friends and family who saw it as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity before transferring to a 4-year school. His host family described him as enthusiastic and impulsive, the kind of young man who acted before thinking but without malicious intent. This safari, organized through his exchange program, was meant to be the highlight of his stay abroad, a chance to see Africa's famous wildlife up close before returning home at the end of summer. The open-sided Land Rover had stopped on a dirt road cutting through knee-high grass speckled with acacia shrubs. The vehicle was one of several used by the lodge, modified with raised seats and metal side panels designed to provide a physical barrier between tourists and wildlife. There were no doors, only open gaps above the panels, and guests were expected to remain seated with their bodies fully inside the frame at all times. The road itself was little more than a pair of worn tracks pressed into the soil by years of safari traffic, bordered closely by brush that could easily conceal large animals. Earlier that morning, the guide had delivered the standard safety briefing at the lodge. He emphasized that guests must remain seated at all times and never extend arms or legs outside the vehicle. He explained that predators often interpreted sudden movement as a threat or opportunity, and that the vehicle's silhouette provided protection by making humans appear as part of a single, large, non-prey object. He specifically warned that lions with cubs were active in this sector of the reserve and were known to be highly defensive. African lionesses are the primary hunters of a pride, weighing roughly 260 to 400 pounds and capable of killing prey several times their own size. Their bite force, estimated around 650 pounds per square inch, is sufficient to crush vertebrae or collapse a windpipe. Highly defensive of cubs, maternal lionesses are among Africa's most unpredictable and dangerous animals. They can sprint up to about 35 miles per hour over short distances, covering ground far faster than a human can react, and attacks often occur with little to no visible warning. Critically, lions rely heavily on visual cues to assess threats, identifying potential dangers by size, movement patterns, and silhouette recognition. When the vehicle rounded a gentle bend and the guide spotted 3 lion cubs playing near a roadside bush approximately 20 feet away, he immediately cut the engine. He raised one hand and quietly instructed everyone to remain still and quiet. The cubs, probably around 4 months old and still displaying the faint spotted coats of youth, rolled and pounced on each other in the dappled shade. Their presence suggested that the mother was nearby, likely resting in thicker cover just out of sight, watching the large green vehicle that her instincts registered as a single, non-threatening object. For several minutes, the tourist took photographs, whispering excitedly as camera shutters clicked. Then Leonid reached into his day pack to swap his camera lens, his movements becoming hurried and expansive. The guide noticed and told him firmly to remain still, but Leonid, distracted by the cub's proximity, shifted his weight to the very edge of his seat. What happened next was a direct result of a fundamental failure in silhouette discipline. As Leonid leaned out, his upper torso and camera lens broke the vertical plane of the vehicle's side panel. To the lioness, a piece of the large neutral object had suddenly detached and moved independently, transforming from a passive environmental feature into a mobile biological threat. The lioness had been monitoring the vehicle from dense cover roughly 30 feet away, her eyes tracking its movements while remaining motionless. Safari vehicles were familiar to her. They appeared regularly on this route, maintaining their shape and distance before moving on. But when Leonid's upper body broke free from the vehicle's outline, her visual processing system registered an immediate threat assessment change. What had been one large stationary object was now a large object with a smaller mobile component advancing toward her offspring. Leonid leaned out farther, extending his arm as he tried to get a closer photograph of the cubs. At that moment, he was less than 8 feet from the nearest cub, his body clearly separated from the vehicle's protective silhouette. the lioness's defensive instincts triggered instantly. The lioness emerged from the brush behind the cubs with almost no visible warning. Witnesses later said they did not see her until she was already in motion. She covered the distance to the vehicle in under 2 seconds. Leonid was still extended over the side, his camera raised, when the lioness struck him with the full force of her roughly 330-pound frame. Leonid's torso was driven backward against the metal edge of the vehicle, and then yanked forward as the lioness's jaws clamped onto his ribcage and shoulder. Her canines punctured through his shirt and skin, sinking deep into the muscle beneath. The dashcam mounted near the front of the Land Rover later captured the attack in grainy detail. The lioness braced against the vehicle, jaws locked around Leonid's upper body, pulling him over the side panel toward the ground. Leonid's legs kicked frantically as he was dragged, his body scraping over the metal edge before disappearing into the grass beside the road. Tourists screamed, their voices overlapping in panic on the audio recording. The lioness never released her grip, using her body weight and neck muscles to overpower him. Leonid's right hand came up weakly, pushing against her muzzle, but the pressure of her bite had already collapsed part of his ribcage. Blood spread rapidly across his chest and neck, soaking through his shirt in dark, irregular patches. The lioness adjusted her grip, releasing momentarily before clamping down again on Leonid's throat and upper chest. This second bite crushed his trachea and severed the carotid artery. His legs stopped moving almost immediately. Witnesses estimated the main attack sequence lasted under a minute from initial contact to the cessation of movement. The lioness began dragging his body toward heavier brush, the cubs scattering into the grass as she moved. After perhaps 10 feet, she released him and retreated quickly, responding to the sound of the engine as the guide restarted the vehicle and repositioned it to create distance. The guide radioed the park ranger station immediately, his voice strained but controlled as he reported a fatal mauling. Rangers from the nearest post arrived 14 minutes later, armed and prepared to tranquilize or, if necessary, shoot the lioness. She was no longer visible, having moved deeper into cover with her cubs. Leonid lay in the grass about 15 feet from the road, his body motionless. Rangers confirmed there was no pulse and extensive visible trauma to the chest and throat. The coroner's report later documented that death resulted from rapid exsanguination and asphyxiation due to massive bite trauma. The remaining tourists were escorted back to the lodge in silence. Statements were taken, dashcam footage was secured, and Leonid's belongings were collected from the vehicle. His family was notified later that day through the U.S. Embassy. The lioness and her cubs were monitored in the following weeks, but were not relocated or destroyed. Officials concluded that she had responded naturally to a perceived threat to her young, and that the incident was the result of clear safety violations. Tendai Mulea was a 46-year-old canoe safari guide who had spent nearly 2 decades navigating the Zambezi's tributaries. Over 19 years, he had never lost a client, a distinction that earned him a senior position with the small outfit that employed him. The operation ran multi-day canoe expeditions along a remote stretch accessible only by bush plane or a 6-hour drive. Safety equipment was limited to life vests, a basic trauma kit, and a handheld radio with inconsistent reception. The company had no backup motorboat, a deficiency Mulea had flagged repeatedly, but was told wasn't justified by the risk. The morning's expedition included 4 tourists across 2 aluminum canoes. Mulea led the first, with 24-year-old junior assistant Chisomo Bwalia bringing up the rear. The route followed the main channel for 8 miles to an overnight campsite. 3 miles in, Mulea spotted heavy hippo activity blocking the channel, a pod of at least 15 animals occupying a deep pool, territorial grunting echoing off steep banks. He diverted through a narrow side channel he had used successfully before. What Mulea could not have known was that receding water levels had transformed this channel into prime territorial habitat. A large bull had claimed it in the weeks since his last transit. Hippopotamuses are among Africa's most dangerous mammals. Adult bulls commonly exceed 3,500 pounds, with lower tusks reaching considerable lengths, and bite force sufficient to crush bone and capsize small watercraft. Bulls are fiercely territorial over waterways, particularly during dry season when habitat compresses. A common defensive response involves surfacing beneath watercraft to capsize them before attacking occupants in the water. Hippos can remain submerged for several minutes while pursuing threats. Mulea guided his canoe into the side channel, the banks narrowing to roughly 40 feet on either side. The water was murky, stained brown by sediment, and shallow in most places. The channel curved gently ahead, obscuring the view beyond a short distance. Mulea paddled steadily, scanning the surface for the telltale ridges of eyes and nostrils that would indicate a submerged hippo. The bull surfaced directly beneath Mulea's canoe without warning. The massive body erupted from below, pitching the aluminum vessel sideways and launching Mulea and his two passengers into the water. The canoe flipped completely, supplies scattering across the churning surface. Both tourists surfaced immediately and scrambled toward the nearest bank, a short distance away. The shallow water and proximity to the bank allowed them to haul themselves onto solid ground within seconds. Mulea surfaced several feet farther from shore, disoriented by the impact and weighed down by his boots and equipment belt. The bull oriented on Mulea instantly. Based on the scene reconstruction, the massive jaws clamped down on Mulea's torso as he attempted to swim toward the bank. The bite likely caused severe crushing injuries consistent with a hippo bite. The hippo shook its head violently, a lateral motion that would have amplified the damage, then dragged him beneath the surface. Mulea struggled briefly as the murky water closed over him, but the combination of severe injuries and submersion meant he likely lost consciousness within moments. The bull released him underwater and moved off down the channel. Mulea's body surfaced face down sometime later, drifting motionless in the current. Bwalya, hearing the commotion from the rear canoe, paddled to the entrance of the side channel, but could not safely enter with his two clients aboard. He radioed for emergency assistance, but the signal failed to connect. The tourists who had reached the bank were stranded without communication equipment and unable to re-enter the water. Bwalya paddled back to the main channel and spent over an hour reaching a fishing camp downstream with a functioning radio. Emergency responders arrived by motorboat several hours after the attack. Mulea's body was recovered from the shallows downstream, where the current had carried him. The attending medic confirmed fatal trauma consistent with a hippo attack. According to local authorities, investigators identified the operator's lack of a motorized escort vessel as a likely contributing safety factor in the delayed emergency response. The side channel had reportedly not been scouted prior to the expedition, and no clear protocol was followed for real-time route assessment during the dry season. The operator suspended canoe operations temporarily before reportedly resuming with revised safety measures the following season. It was April 3, 2018, and the Namibian sun was already climbing toward its midday peak over Etosha National Park. The air shimmered with heat across the open plains, where scattered acacia trees provided the only shade for miles. Temperatures were pushing toward 100 degrees, and the dry season had left the landscape parched and dusty. Sophie Laurent adjusted the camera mounted on her chest harness. At 26 years old, the conservation volunteer from Lyon, France, had spent the past 4 months working with a small wildlife trust in Etosha, documenting black rhino populations. Black rhinos were critically endangered, with fewer than 5,500 remaining in the wild. That morning, Sophie was working with Dr. Peter Van Rooyen and Malcolm Hughes, a wildlife photographer. Their target was a female black rhino nicknamed Kaya, Swahili for home, who had recently given birth to her second calf. Malcolm was filming with a professional-grade video camera. The team approached in a modified Land Rover, staying inside the vehicle as per strict park protocols. They parked a good distance from where Kaya and her calf were resting beneath an acacia tree. Malcolm's footage shows Kaya lying on her side, the calf nursing. After several minutes of observation, Kaya stood abruptly, her ears rotated forward, nostrils flaring. The calf scrambled to its feet. What happened next was unexpected. Sophie's door, which she had left slightly ajar for better air circulation, swung fully open. A strong gust of wind caught it, and the door banged against the vehicle's side panel with a sharp metallic clang. Kaya reacted instantly. She lowered her head, horn pointing forward, and charged toward the sound. Dr. Van Rooyen called out for Sophie to close the door and told their driver, Johannes Amukoshi, to drive. Johannes started the engine and began accelerating, but the Land Rover was slow to build speed on the soft sand. Black rhinos are among the most dangerous animals in Africa, capable of weighing up to 3,000 pounds. Despite their massive bulk, they can run at speeds exceeding 35 miles per hour, faster than most humans can sprint. Their horn can gore and kill with devastating efficiency. When protecting their young, black rhino mothers become living weapons. Though their eyesight is poor, they charge aggressively toward any perceived threat, using sound and movement to guide them. Sophie lunged for her door, trying to pull it shut, but the wind resistance made it difficult. The door swung partially closed, then banged open again. Sophie was leaning out, both hands gripping the door handle. Kaya reached the vehicle in seconds. Her horn struck the open door with tremendous force, tearing it partially free. Sophie, still gripping the handle, was pulled halfway out of the moving vehicle. Malcolm's camera shows Sophie dangling from the Land Rover's side. Dr. Van Rooyen grabbed her arms, trying to pull her back in. Johannes accelerated harder, the vehicle bouncing violently. The damaged door continued to bang and swing, creating more noise and movement. Kaya charged again at the moving vehicle, her massive bulk slamming into the side. The impact caught Sophie's exposed body, and the force knocked her completely free. She hit the ground hard. Kaya stood her ground nearby, snorting aggressively, her calf safely positioned behind her. The rhino's behavior was textbook maternal defense. She made no attempt to pursue the vehicle further, instead positioning herself between her calf and the perceived danger. Dr. Van Rooyen called out from the vehicle as he watched Sophie's motionless form on the ground, knowing they couldn't approach while Kaya remained in defensive posture. Malcolm's camera captured the moment as Johannes slammed on the brakes. Dr. Van Rooyen reached for the emergency radio. Even from the vehicle, the severity of Sophie's injuries was apparent. The team was forced to wait, unable to provide any medical assistance while the protective mother rhino stood guard. Kaya remained in the area for several minutes, preventing any approach. Only when satisfied did she slowly back away, guiding her calf toward the acacia tree. Johannes carefully maneuvered closer. Dr. Van Rooyen and Malcolm rushed to Sophie's side. She was unconscious, barely breathing, with massive trauma to her torso. Blood pooled rapidly beneath her. Dr. Van Rooyen applied pressure and attempted CPR, but the internal damage was too severe. Sophie died at the scene before the medical helicopter could arrive. The cause of death was massive internal trauma and hemorrhaging. Etosha National Park officials reviewed Malcolm's footage. Their report concluded that the door malfunction created an unpredictable situation that triggered Kaya's protective instincts. The charge was classified as defensive maternal behavior. No action was taken against Kaya. Park protocols were updated to require all vehicle doors to be secured with safety straps during rhino observations. The footage from both Malcolm's camera and Sophie's chest-mounted camera was retained by Namibian wildlife authorities for their official investigation. After the investigation concluded, the footage was sealed and never released publicly. Officials cited the ongoing need to protect the identities and privacy of conservation workers in the field, noting that releasing such graphic content could discourage future volunteers from participating in critical endangered species research. It was September 12, 2016, and the Okavango Delta stretched endlessly under the late afternoon sun, its waters deceptively calm as Marco Duval's boat drifted through a narrow channel scattered with water lilies and half-submerged hippos. Marco Duval, 38, was the attorney who never truly left the office even when his body occupied exotic locations. His colleagues joked that Marco could negotiate a settlement from anywhere, and he had, from Bali, from Patagonia, from safaris like this one. His wife Elena had begged him to leave work behind for this trip, their 10th anniversary present to themselves. But 3 days into the Delta tour, his phone had buzzed with what his senior partner called a crisis. Marco promised Elena it would be quick, just one call to smooth things over. The trip to Botswana had been Elena's idea, a chance to reconnect away from Chicago's relentless pace. Marco had agreed, booking an upscale safari package that promised authentic wilderness encounters. He'd purchased an expensive camera setup specifically for wildlife photography, excited about capturing images of elephants and big cats. But old habits proved difficult to break, and when his phone found signal that afternoon at the lodge, Marco couldn't resist checking email. The Delta shimmered with golden light, its surface broken by the rounded backs of hippopotamuses scattered throughout the channel. These massive animals are among Africa's most dangerous, responsible for more human deaths than lions or crocodiles. Adult hippos can weigh up to 4,000 pounds, and despite their bulk, can move with shocking speed both in water and on land. Territorial by nature, they become particularly aggressive when they perceive threats to their space, attacking boats that drift too close with little warning. Their guide, Lasigo, had warned them to stay seated, keep hands inside the boat, and remain quiet, explaining that hippos react to noise and sudden movements. As Marco argued on the phone and leaned over the gunwale to photograph a hippo, Lasigo tried to move the boat back and physically pull him down. A loud snort erupted, and a second hippo surfaced just 15 feet away, opening its jaws and blowing sharply, a clear warning. The guide shouted for Marco to sit down, his voice sharp with alarm. Other tourists in boats further down the channel looked up at the commotion. Elena yanked harder on Marco's arm, but he jerked away from her grip, annoyed at the interruption. The boat drifted slightly with the current, closing the distance to the agitated hippo by another yard. Through the clear water, Lesego could see the animal's massive body tense, its legs pushing against the muddy bottom as it began to rise. The hippo lunged without further warning, exploding from the water with a speed that defied its enormous bulk. Marco, still half standing and turned away, registered movement too late. The animal surged forward and snapped its jaws toward him as it struck the side of the Mokoro, the force knocking him sideways out of the boat. He hit the knee-deep water over the sandbar hard, his back and ribs slamming against submerged tree branches that jutted from the channel floor. The impact drove the air from his lungs. Before Marco could orient himself or attempt to stand in the shallow water, the hippo was on him. Its massive jaws opened wide and clamped down on his torso, the tusks punching through flesh and grating against bone. Marco's scream was cut short as the hippo began to thrash its head violently, crushing his ribcage with grinding pressure. Elena's shrieks mixed with Lesego's shouts as the guide frantically grabbed a signal flare from the emergency kit. The hippo released Marco momentarily before lunging forward again in another violent burst, biting down across his side and dragging him through the muddy shallows. Marco's arms flailed weakly as water churned red around him. Each time he surfaced gasping, the hippo attacked again in short, violent surges, biting and crushing. Lesego fired the flare directly at the hippo's face while shouting and striking the water with his paddle. Another guide from a boat 30 yards away paddled desperately closer, adding his voice to the noise. The combined disturbance finally caused the hippo to retreat after several separate charges over roughly a minute. It submerged and moved away into deeper water, leaving Marco floating face down, barely conscious and critically injured in the bloodied shallows. Lesego and the second guide hauled Marco's limp body into the boat with Elena's help. His torso showed massive trauma, ribs visibly crushed, deep puncture wounds from tusks, and severe tissue damage from the repeated bites. He was semi-conscious, struggling to breathe, blood bubbling from his mouth with each shallow attempt. The guides began emergency evacuation immediately, paddling hard toward the nearest camp with radio access. It took 20 minutes to reach the lodge where an emergency medical team waited. Marco died during the boat journey, succumbing to massive internal hemorrhaging and organ damage from crushed ribs that had punctured both lungs and his liver. Local authorities thoroughly documented the incident, filing detailed reports on the circumstances leading to Marco's death, and interviewing all guides and expedition participants. Elena returned to Chicago carrying the weight of her husband's body and the shock of the day's events. It was July 18, 2016, and the Serengeti stretched endlessly beneath the late afternoon sun, its golden grasslands concealing the most efficient killers in Africa. Phoebe Ashworth, 31, worked as a pediatric dental assistant in Melbourne, Australia, known for her patient manner with anxious children. Grant, 34, managed logistics for a small furniture importing company. They had married 6 days earlier in a small ceremony attended by close family, then immediately departed for a 2-week East African safari they had booked through a mid-range tour operator. Friends later described them as enthusiastic travelers who favored Instagram-worthy destinations but had no meaningful wilderness experience. Their itinerary included 3 days in Serengeti National Park, focusing on the western corridor during the seasonal wildebeest migration. Their assigned guide was Meshack Nyerere, a driver with 11 years of experience navigating Serengeti's predator zones. He had an unblemished safety record according to colleagues, and was known among colleagues for his strict adherence to park regulations. The couple had struck him as pleasant but dismissive of his warnings, laughing off his instructions during their first morning drive. That afternoon, Meshack slowed the Land Cruiser after spotting movement in grass approximately 130 feet away. He spoke quietly, informing the couple that lions were resting nearby and they must remain inside the vehicle. African lions are social predators and prides, with females doing most hunting. Their 1.5-inch retractable claws grip prey, and their powerful jaws can crush the neck and torso, typically killing by suffocation. Movement triggers their predatory instinct, turning passive observation into active pursuit. Phoebe had asked moments earlier if they could step outside for photos together in the open plains. Meshack declined firmly, explaining that exiting vehicles in predator zones violated park regulations and created life-threatening situations. The couple nodded and laughed, agreeing verbally, but continuing to discuss the photo opportunity they were missing. Several minutes passed in relative silence. Meshack stepped out briefly to check the front passenger tire, having warned them repeatedly to stay inside. He returned to find them already outside, about 8 feet from the Land Cruiser, and calmly instructed them to return slowly. Phoebe moved toward the passenger door first, while Grant stayed several steps back, framing another shot. From 40 feet away, a lioness emerged from the grass, body low and shoulders forward, pausing briefly before advancing. 3 additional lions rose behind her, their heads turning in unison toward the vehicle. Grant spotted the approaching lioness and froze completely, his camera lowering. Phoebe turned only when Meshach shouted a warning. The lioness accelerated into a full sprint, covering the remaining distance in under 2 seconds. She struck Grant from his left side with enough force to knock him off his feet, her claws embedding in his shoulder and ribs as they fell together. The impact drove the air from Grant's lungs audibly. He struck the ground hard, his head bouncing off the packed dirt. The remaining Pride members committed immediately, closing the distance at full speed. Phoebe screamed and lunged for the passenger door, but a second lioness hit her from behind before she reached the handle, jaws closing around her upper back and neck. The force slammed her face first into the Land Cruiser's side panel, breaking her nose and splitting her forehead open against the metal. She collapsed beneath the lioness's weight. Meshach scrambled into the driver's seat and pressed the horn continuously, the sound blaring across the grassland. 3 lions were already on Grant, dragging him through the dirt toward taller grass. His legs kicked weakly as teeth tore through his abdomen and thigh, exposing muscle. Blood spread rapidly beneath him, soaking into the dry earth. The lioness holding Phoebe shook her violently, inflicting catastrophic spinal trauma. Phoebe's body went limp instantly. The lioness released her only to reposition, clamping down on her throat and holding steady as Phoebe's chest heaved once, twice, then stopped. Another lioness joined, biting into Phoebe's hip and pulling her away from the vehicle. Grant's struggles ceased within 2 minutes of the initial attack, his body going still as the lions worked methodically. Swedish tourists in another vehicle approximately 200 yards away later reported seeing at least 3 lions on Grant simultaneously. The entire attack lasted approximately 4 minutes before the Pride dragged both bodies roughly 80 yards into denser grass, seeking more cover. Meshach radioed park rangers immediately after the lions moved off. A patrol unit arrived 24 minutes later, finding him still in the vehicle, shaken. The Pride remained visible at a distance, allowing cautious approach. The recovered remains showed massive tissue trauma, severed arteries, crushed cervical vertebrae, and significant consumption. Both victims died from blood loss and suffocation. Tanzanian authorities completed a standard incident investigation, confirming the couple had violated explicit park regulations by exiting their vehicle in a known predator zone. The deaths received brief coverage in Australian regional media, but generated little international attention.